All right, welcome. Hope you're all doing well. Anyway, a little bit of coffee. So today is going to be one of the last theologically based streams that we do for a good while. In fact, I more and more think that it's probably not really the right thing for laity to be teaching theology anyway. And I think because not just because of like the spiritual warfare or the temptations to this or that or whatever. I think that there's a lot of different reasons why, and partly has to do with authority, which I do respect. I think we should definitely respect authority. We should respect those who have an office, even if we think that they're in error. And so it's not really our duty to sort of go on tangents exposing people, especially people of a higher order than us. However, sometimes people, especially clerics, are exceedingly negligent in their duties. I'm not talking about anybody specific in that. I'm talking about one of the difficulties, I think, in this domain is when you have people who might have had a lot of study in something, but not a lot of experience in something. And that applies to a lot of us, including myself, in terms of not just knowing doctrines intellectually or philosophically, but the application of those things. And so just a little bit of a background here. Tonight will be a very different type of stream. It'll be very in-depth first about just some of my thoughts on problems. And then we'll go into the theological issues with Fr Romanides. And I'm going to be very precise. I'm going to be very specific. I'm going to show you the books. I read his books, explicitly what the mistake is, because a lot of people, especially catechumens and people new to this, they get caught up in this problem, which I did. So many years ago, when I was first looking at orthodoxy, I was caught up in, well, is it Augustine or is it Father John Romanides that was correct? And as we're going to see that, in my view, on many of the issues, particularly Father Romanides is more correct, especially the issues of the energies, especially issues like divine simplicity, the issues like angel of the Lord being the Logos. He's certainly correct on all those things. But it doesn't follow from that everything that he said was correct. And it doesn't follow from that using terminology that Augustine used is therefore Latinizing or Western or heterodox or any of these things. And part of this problem has to do with the usage of words and how words can be interpreted in different ways and in different contexts, and they don't always have just one meaning. And it's going to be a big problem when we look at this recurring problem that Basil actually highlighted in some of his letters. St Basil said that heretics can't distinguish multiple senses of words, and so they get tripped up thinking that a word always means this. And we're especially going to see this with the outlandish heresies that John the Pilgrim is promoting, an individual who it turns out has actually been subverting and going after me on a personal level and in terms of our work for many years. This individual has written the most schizo level blog post I've ever seen, with random capitalizations, random colors. I mean, the guy is just, nobody could read this and think this is a sane person. And the whole post is about how I'm a cult leader and I'm insane and this and that. This guy's insane. I mean, when you see what this guy is teaching today, what he's publicly saying is the case, touting himself as a scholar, talking about St. Maximus, the guy has no clue what he's talking about. And not only that, said some of the wackiest, weirdest heterodox stuff I've ever heard. And I'm going to show you that his conclusion, why he would come to this conclusion as a Romanides scholar, is precisely the result of the errors and the mistakes that I pinpointed years ago in Father Romanides and highlighted were a danger. Now, I am not in a position, nor do I have any interest in declaring that I think Father Romanides is heterodox. That's not my position to do. And I don't have any interest in doing that. I am not interested in deciding anybody's destiny, nor does any of us humans have the ability to do that. Right? That's between them and God. I don't have any interest in that. Plus, it would be out of character. It wouldn't make any sense for me to say, I'm going to expose Father Romanides. I don't believe that. But there are countless public, clear statements that he made, particularly regarding his affirmation explicitly of nominalism, that are going to be a very serious problem in the theology. And we're going to see that. I'm going to show you all of this explicitly from his works. And how anybody could be a nominalist in the William of Ockham sense and at all believe in Christology is beyond me. I don't know how you could ever get recapitulation and the notion of Christ assuming universal human nature if you don't believe in universals. And the lunatic that has spent years coming after me, and is confirmed, and I'm 90%, 95% sure that the schizo blog post is him, has led this lunatic to some of the most outlandish, absurd stuff I've ever heard. And so to talk about me being a contentious, quarreling person has nothing to do with this lunatic subverting what I've been talking about and what I've been doing for years because of his personal cowardice to actually come and discuss the issues, which he would never do, which he always said, I don't believe in debating. Oh, I'm too pious for debating. Meanwhile, he writes anonymous blog posts, which are his, calling me a cult leader, calling me a heretic, calling me all this nonsense. And the vindication comes every time these people with these mental illnesses do this. When it comes down to it, and we find out what they really believe, they don't have a clue what they're talking about. That is why none of these people will ever face me in a public debate. And I asked this guy to come and debate multiple times. And what did he do? He said that debating is not of the mind of the fathers. Again, a total lie. He went and anonymously wrote multiple blog posts, one about me that's about 20 pages of schizo level posting with his multiple fonts and colors, right? And would never come and actually discuss the issues. And then he hides behind piety, as all of these people do. This is the most annoying and disgusting thing in so many of these Orthodox so-called people, is their false piety signaling, their public posting of all of their icons and how pious they are and how much they pray. It's disgusting. Jesus said to go into your inner room. He did not tell you to go on Twitter and tell everybody how much you pray. He didn't tell you to go on Twitter and tell everybody to excoriate you and everybody on Twitter tell me how much of a sinner I am and come at me all day. That is weird, man. There is some kind of weird mental illness that is going on with a lot of these people. And I'm not joking when I say that I think John the Pilgrim literally has a mental illness, because there's no way you could do this for years on end like this. And when confronted about it, say that you're not doing it. And then today, do it publicly. Come at me saying that I don't know anything about Maximus, saying I'm making up patristic terms that are the most common terms out there. It is unbelievable for a person getting his PhD in Orthodox theology as a layperson and this as an Orthodox philosopher to sit there and tell me that the word, the divine mind, is something that I made up, that it doesn't exist in the fathers. That is embarrassing. It is so common it shouldn't even be in dispute. And it shows that that guy is a joke. It's an embarrassment. And why is he the editor of one of these top traditional Orthodox publishers? And he's been subverting me and my work and what I've done for years. And he's been asked to stop, and he didn't stop. And today, he publicly affirms the most retarded heresy I've ever heard of. And I've never even heard of this, which we're going to get into in a minute. And so if you say, well, are you mad? Are you quarreling? I'm mad because this individual, who I've never even talked to because he won't talk, has subverted the work that we did for years. And when his boss has it pointed out, he does it again today. And then publicly affirms the most retarded form of Apollinarianism I've ever heard. So yeah, I'm mad. I'm mad about that because if I get to a certain point when people push this stuff and it goes on for years and we tolerate it and we tolerate it and we tolerate it, and then at a certain point I'm not going to tolerate it anymore. Especially when these people do all this stuff in the public sphere. He wrote his gigantic schizo blog posts in the public sphere attacking me. And if he's not going to stop when he's asked to stop, I'm not going to stop. I'm not going to stop replying. I might not deal with the mental illness of the people in this sphere anymore and just move on. But I'm not going to let you push me around. I'm not going to let you manipulate me. None of that piety signaling is going to work or get anywhere with me. And nobody actually believes that you won't come and debate these topics because you're actually so pious. Give me a break, dude. All right. So before I get into that, though, I want to say a little bit more about laity teaching, why it's not a good idea, why I don't like doing it. And I've never really liked doing it. I felt like at many times it was a duty to do. It's not a grift, and I don't really like doing it. I feel like the topics that I know about, philosophy, geopolitics, I don't feel any weirdness about teaching those things. But for example, when I was doing tutoring in geopolitics and philosophy and history, which is what my degrees are in, I would have people saying, I want you to teach me theology. And I always told those people, I don't feel right about teaching you theology in some sort of private tutoring. It just doesn't feel right to me. And I talked to a lot of clerics, and not just one, not just two, but probably 5, 10. And, you know, they're usually encouraging in this regard. But something just doesn't feel right about it. And it never has really felt right with me to give the impression of a public ministry. And we've seen a lot of people out there in the Orthodox sphere doing this. The ministry of this or that so-called person. So-called LARPing monastic person. That doesn't feel right to me. I mean, whenever we're not Protestants. So what is your ministry that you've set up? Right. And when people say this to me, it feels weird. Ministry? I mean, I'm not a Calvinist. I'm not an evangelical. I'm not trying to set up a ministry. And it is the case, first of all, that just knowing the topics intellectually in the domain of religion and theology is not enough, right? So let me put it this way. So 4 years ago, 5 years ago, whenever it was, 2017, 18, when I first was received into the church, I was very eager to write. I was like, I want to write a book. I'm ready to write this book. And my goal was not to be a fan, but I really felt like this book needs to be written because it refutes the Roman Catholic position on divine simplicity. And I had multiple people say, you know, that's a good desire. However, you might not be ready to write that book, even though you do have a lot of knowledge in that field. It's not just about the knowledge and the accruing of the information. And at first, when I heard that, you know, say in 2017, 2018, I was a little miffed. Well, what? I mean, I know this topic. I need to write about this, right? And then the more that I was introduced to more and more literature on the subject, more and more of the academic literature, basically reading almost all of Dr. Bradshaw's works, and the more I read, I realized, you know, I'm probably not ready to write on this, because not just in an intellectual way, but if you set yourself up as a teacher, that's a serious thing. I really do understand that a lot better now than I did 4 or 5 years ago. And, you know, Paul says, if a man desires to teach, that's an honorable thing. So it's not bad in itself to desire to teach. But he does say that a new convert can be puffed up, so it's not a good idea. And the more that I've lived and tried to do this the right way, the more I see the wisdom in that. And in ways I've violated that, because it's true that there's a fuzzy line between philosophy and theology. That's true. And I don't feel bad about doing debates and this kind of stuff because I feel like that's the domain of philosophy that I do know. But I've always, and everybody who's been in the Discord for the last 4 years knows that we never gave people spiritual advice. And I feel very strongly about that because it was hammered into us and to me, especially in the Discord over the year, you don't do that. It's not your position or your job to give people moral and spiritual advice, especially as it comes to their personal life decisions. That's the job of their spiritual father. Okay. And, when we first had the Discord as it was growing, we got tremendous amounts of attack and flack because people said, he's trying to set up a cult. He's trying to be a guru. He's trying to. No. That's not true. That's why we brought in clergy. And anytime there was a question like this, we always deferred to the clergy. And when there's a question that I don't know, I defer to the people that know better than me. And that I actually appreciate that. That's the normal attitude. That's the healthy way to go about this. The people that have helped you come into this faith, the people that have helped you know these things, right? To defer to them. And so it was never my intention to be in a position where I'm going to be the Orthodox theologian. I do not desire to be that. I really don't. As I've said many times, when we had the first debates with Adam Kokesh, the atheist, right, with JF, those are the first early atheist debates. I never had any conception that we would be where this is right now. Really didn't. There's always been an internal struggle with me about is it more appropriate for a person to talk about these theological terms and not talk about the geopolitical, the conspiratorial, the Hollywood, etc. Okay, and I understand that logic, and I think there's something to that. That's why I feel it's always felt weird to me to having feet in both worlds. On the one hand, I might know this intellectual material, but that's not all there is to being a teacher, right? It's mainly something lived. Then that's absolutely true. And so when I see people who are new converts, especially, and this happens all the time. It happened to me. It happened to me when I almost became Orthodox in 2007. What happens is that you are overcome with zeal, and you feel like that, number one, it's your job to do great things for God. And again, that's not inherently bad. We should all desire to do great things for God. But then what happens is there is a temptation that people don't recognize where your desire to do great things for God becomes another form of prelest or delusion, where you now think that in order to solidify and prove to God your faithfulness and your devotion, you have to do these big things. You've got to be doing a monastic prayer rule as a catechumen. You've got to be solving every theological problem in the history of the church. You've got to read the Rudder and Master Canon Law, right? And as a very spurgy 22, 3, 4, 5-year-old, this is exactly what I did. I made all these same mistakes. And I didn't understand when people said, this isn't the way that you should come into Orthodoxy. And it bothered me, probably because I have a dose of the tism. I don't know, probably, but I'm just, right. So, and it was many, many years before I realized why that is the case and why people say that. I thought they were just kind of being like, sounds to me like you're just trying to be all pious or something, right? But that's not true. There really is a process that occurs where one unlearns a lot of the baggage, right? And the other thing that I realized over many years was, and having egg on my face many times, was that a lot of these issues are very difficult. There are people with PhDs and THDs working through these topics now. There is new literature in these fields on a daily basis. And so it is ludicrous to assume or think that as a new convert, you're going to, in a year or two of being brought into the church, solve these issues or really even get a good grasp of them. And so I started studying Orthodox theology in about 2007. Okay. And it's 2022. So that's 15 years. Now there's plenty of people way deeper into this than me. And I waited 10 years before coming into the church. So first of all, it was never the case that I was trying to be a teacher, even though at times I reluctantly have done this and talked about it. And I've expressed to many priests and many people that I always feel weird about it because I just don't know if it's appropriate, right? But some of the things that bother me was that you would see priests, very prominent, I'm not picking out anybody in specific, but bishops, OCA people especially, who didn't know anything and mislead people, right? I'm not talking about any, I think people can figure out which bishop I'm talking about, but I'm not going to name anybody to start drama. But, 3 or 4 years ago, this was a significant problem with a certain bishop. And to me, it was just bizarre that you would have this kind of a situation where things are so crazy in certain places and jurisdictions, and then you've got lay people who are new to that, and they are actually more correct than the people who've been in it for 20 or 30 years or 40 years or 50 years. It's a weird thing. I don't know. It's just weird. But sometimes that happens. I don't know. And so it kind of puts everybody in a weird place, right? I mean, it's not like it's my fault that, for example, we would have a bishop who is saying crazy stuff, right? That's not my fault. But at the same time, there are appropriate ways of going about those things, and it probably shouldn't be like a public taking on of this kind of a person, right? I forgot to put the show notes and all that in there, but you guys know you guys know the drill. If you guys would put the super chat link, because on another level, I feel like, thank you, Jethro, I feel like, a lot of the stuff that I've talked about is kind of all out there, right? I mean, it's like at a certain point, like how many times do we have to say the same things over and over, right? I mean, the Roman Catholic response is pretty much the same. the response to all these different groups, it doesn't really change. I mean, it's kind of already out there. So, but to get back to this point about morals and piety signaling, I think this is just the most nauseating thing, and it's something that really irks me. I can't stand it. I can't stand to see the people touting how much they pray, making these just bizarre displays about it. It's weird. Now, it's not just, I'm not trying to call out only Orthodox, but some of the Roman Catholics point out, they say, you don't ever go against Orthodox or criticize Orthodox. We criticize people in the church all the time. No, that's not true. We've done many streams where we criticize problems in the Orthodox world, and this is one of those streams. There are plenty of problems in the Orthodox world. In fact, we did a good stream many years ago where we talked about problems when you come in. And we talked about how, and Father Hears is correct to say this, that when you come into the church, that's just the beginning, right? Now is when it really starts. And boy, is that true. I mean, the battles begin when you come into the church. So it's a great victory and a great battle getting into the church. And then when you're in there, it's a whole other world. But that's part of the struggle. That's part of the warfare. And that's true. But it still doesn't mean that there are, let's talk about the problems. So when you're in the Orthodox Church, there's a whole new slew of temptations that then come about. And let's look at the character of David Bentley Hart as an example. David Bentley Hart, I don't know that much about him. I've never followed him. I mean, I've been aware of what he says in various articles and books, but I don't regularly follow his material. But I've been aware of him and looked at what he talks about over the years. And, certain people, Perry Robinson, for example, had said many years ago that there were red flags in David Bentley Hart. And other people would say there's red flags when somebody is new to the Orthodox Church and they're teaching and they keep teaching, right? So you hear that and you think, oh, well, okay, yeah, that might be the case. And then eventually what always happens is that very often, if not in every case, there ends up being a pretty significant vindication when people end up sort of going off when the red flags are there. They go off in these crazy directions. We've seen this with David Bentley Hart, where he has recently, in his blog posts replying to Dr. Fazer, affirmed basically perennialism. And I think pretty much everybody kind of knew he was on that track for a long time anyway, given his universalism and his confusion of nature and person. So that's a case study in another person, right? And I would say, too, like, if I had become Orthodox in 2007, I wouldn't have been ready. I didn't know. I didn't get these issues, how difficult the theological issues are and how many years it takes. I mean, that's, I guess what I'm saying here is that the reason that it is partly intellectual. It is partly philosophical. Now, I'm not saying your salvation is contingent upon whether you solve these problems or whether you get a THD, but in the course of the debate on these topics, it is actually the case that you cannot understand these topics without doing the reading. Now, not everybody's called to do that reading. Not everybody has the capabilities of doing that reading. Not everybody has the time, the effort, the money. Not everybody has the providential situation by which they can spend 15, 20 years reading philosophical and patristic works. But some people do that. There's a letter where St Basil says, not everybody should study theology. He says it's a very taxing, difficult enterprise. It is not for everybody. And I don't care how pious you are, if you're going to speak on this field and you don't know anything about philosophy, you're going to have a really hard time. Does that mean that every elder or saint has a degree in philosophy? No. But a lot of elders and saints don't go into that because they don't feel like it's necessary to go into that. But on another level, when we look at the councils, when we look at the fathers, many of them did go into that. Many of them were philosophers. Many of them utilize very complex, very difficult, especially the Cappadocians, especially St. Gregory Nyssa, especially St. Maximus, St. Photius, utilized vast, extensive philosophical categories in learning. The works of Plato, Plotinus, Aristotle, Porphyry, on and on and on. And for people who come into the church and don't want to go into that, there's nothing wrong with that. Nobody has to do that stuff. But there's a flip side to that if you want to speak on that and you want to publicly call people out, publicly go after people, publicly subvert what they've been doing for years in your mental illness, delusion, and obsession, you're going to be made an embarrassment if you keep at it. And I warned this person. I told him years ago that if you keep it up, I'm going to embarrass you. And I'm going to do that today. I'm not embarrassing this dude because I hate him. I genuinely think this person has problems. I talked to somebody who knows him personally, met him, and said that they thought he was mentally off. And I'm going to show you, according to the way he talks and what he says, he is mentally off. And again, people think that this is me being contentious, that I'm up here. Dude, the majority of what we do here on my channel and my work is not me going after people. It's not me one-on-one. It's not me attacking. Okay? 90 to 95% of the material that we put out, that I put out, and what we've done in the Discord in the last 4 years with almost 10,000 people in there, and the thousands, maybe 10, 20,000 people that have come into Orthodoxy in the last 2 or 3 years. Okay, none of that was built on just being a contentious person. And I never asked to have that role. I didn't expect to have that role. That Discord started out as just my personal Discord for people who like my movie blog. That was it. Then it grew into its own thing. And by the way, I since have handed that off weeks ago because it's too much of a hassle. It's too much. I can't handle that. Plus, we got a whole bunch of other stuff that we're trying to do. So it's just too much work. And we have there were great mods in there, but it's not my Discord anymore, and it's in other people's hands. So it is what it is. And I'm not mad at anybody over there. Nobody wronged me. But it's not. It's just not. It doesn't work. There's just too much. I can't manage a group of almost 10,000 people and do all the stuff I got to do. I mean, I can't even answer the emails that come in all day. And then on top of that, to have these mentally ill, obsessive people who obsess over, 4 years ago being asked to debate and then being so passive aggressive and so mentally unstable that they've spent the last 4 years obsessed on me and coming after me in every little stupid, bitchy way they can is just pitiful. And he's not the only one. There's networks of these people. It's just unbelievable. And clerics, they don't care. There are some but they don't care. They'll let these lunatics run wild. There's a whole nest of them that run wild doing this nonstop. And clerics, I don't care. They don't want to be involved. So, at a certain point, you feel like, well, okay, I'll step back and you can deal with these obsessives. You can let these mentally ill people, you can deal with them, because it shouldn't be. I mean, half of these people should be excommunicated, first of all, right? Because it's years of subversion. It's years of working with leftist groups, years of working with. I mean, look at the fact that Father Trenum, I don't know Father Trenum, I've never met him, not knocking him, I have respect for him. I don't think he's ever done it. I've never seen him do anything untoward or anything. But he had to go to the civil courts. So the hierarchy won't stand up for him. So he has to turn to the civil courts. What an embarrassment. And I don't have any problem saying that's embarrassing. It's embarrassing for the Orthodox. And so, Lofton and all these people say, he won't ever go after Orthodox. He won't criticize. Yes, we do. This is embarrassing. I don't have no problem saying it's embarrassing. And I'm not saying that I'm setting myself up and I don't have this problem. I'm saying that it's unreal. I mean, the level of, clerics and priests and people who have what they've tried to get me excommunicated, let lunatics run crazy on me for years. And I know every one of who the people are. And it turns out some of them are Skittles and crazy in a literal way. And nobody cares. And it's not like, well, they don't have a big audience. They don't care. It's not about having a big audience, because they spend all their time in small chat groups doing nothing but coming into every comment, every Twitter feed, every thread, and confusing catechumens. And they've done it for 5 damn years. And they just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And we know who these people are. And we've talked about them for years, and we've talked about them to clerics, and they don't care. They would rather not deal with it. So what is the point of, because I don't even feel like it's appropriate as a lay person to be doing this. So why am I laboring to bring people into the churches? I think that's why they don't mind me being here and doing this. I think most of them don't like me. I mean, there's probably half and half, right? They don't mind me bringing people to their parish. But when there's problems, when there's controversy, when there's issues of people underneath them, right under their nose, spending years subverting what I do, doesn't stop. So what is the point of me doing this to help people come to the church when the clergy of the church, I feel like, at least a large percentage, they don't like what I do, and they find it weird. I find it weird, honestly, because I never planned on this. Again, like, I didn't think I would be doing this, and I don't know. It's just, the whole world is just surreal, and everything's insane. So it's just weird, man. But the last thing I'll say about the laity and the piety signaling and all that is that, I've talked about that in streams before. One thing that seems to happen quite often, and Metropolitan Jonah, I think, is correct when he talks about this as a problem, is that you get laity who feel like they need to confess at monasteries and they need to be monastics. And there's nothing wrong with that desire, but then they feel like it's their job to be on the internet as Twitter's spiritual father. They need to be on the internet as the John Chrysostom of Twitter. And this is just makes no sense. It's bizarre, it's weird, and it causes problems because it's just not appropriate. It doesn't make sense, especially people that are new converts, to write articles telling people to not listen to any music or movies. Okay? You're not a monk. And it was always drilled into my head that it's not your position to give people moral advice and tell them what they're supposed to do and not do. You can direct them to clergy, but we have multiple people now have done this where they have decided that they're quasi monks, and it's their job to tell people, you don't need to play video games, you don't need to listen to music on the radio, you don't need to attend a movie, you shouldn't watch TV, you don't need, no, this is not your place, first of all. Secondly, it's a bizarre, weird rigorism that, as if the arts in themselves become evil. I mean, where did you get the idea that there's the secular world where those things occur versus the non-secular world? Now, it makes sense in a monastic setting, but the people telling me this, they're not monks. Okay, you're not a monastic. And it's weird, and it causes these delusions when people believe that they're monks and they're acting like monks when they're not. And maybe it's because they confess at monasteries, which maybe that's their only option. I don't know. I'm not judging that. But there's a reason Metropolitan Jonas says that laity shouldn't confess at monasteries, because those are confessors typically dealing with monastics. And if you live in the world, it's a different life. And so what then happens is that stricter rule, which there's nothing wrong with, but it's not appropriate for you to go and start telling everybody how they're sinning if they go to the movies or if they listen to the Doobie Brothers on the radio. And it's not your position to start telling everybody what married people are supposed to do in the bedroom. And it's not your position to make decisions on whether or not, which we've all had. So I'm not knocking the people that do that, but I'm saying that when you have been in these positions for a while, that stuff looks weird, and it's something off about it. And so it's all the more odd to me that people would say you're a cult leader. I mean, that's what this lunatic John the Pilgrim says. Cult leader. I mean, You are the one LARPing as a monk. I've never said anything about myself as a monk. Never claimed to be anything like that. Haven't been up here giving people spiritual advice. Haven't done any of that stuff. One of the reasons I think that people do resonate with what we talk about is that I think people realize that the dude that you see you're interacting with on your screen is that's the real dude. Okay, I'm not doing a LARP up here where you see me with my prayer rope and where you see me. Let us pray before we talk on the live stream. Everyone look upon me as I pray. Now, do we do any of that? No, because it's icky and it's weird and it's off-putting. Do you see the declarations of, I will no longer be creating online content because I have become so humble that I no longer feel I should, because it is a temptation, and I want everyone to know that it's a temptation to me, and I want everyone to know that I'm publicly telling you how I'm all a sinner, and that's all pride too. That's all prelest. I mean, can we not just be normal people here? Can we not just be normal people? And on top of that, John the Pilgrim and all of these characters, why are you not a public person? You're a public intellectual, a public editor, and yet you're hiding under multiple accounts and pseudonyms, and you're writing these blog posts anonymously attacking me? That's a form of deception. Okay, I don't have sock accounts. I have one joke account in the Discord that I used, and that was to transfer the ownership of the Discord at one point, 2 years ago, or 1 year ago. I don't have sock accounts. I don't waste my time with multiple accounts, anonymous writing. Ooh, like I have time to do that. Come on. Now, there might be situations when a person needs to have a sock account, whatever. But John the Pilgrim, why do you have a sock account? You're a public intellectual getting your PhD in Romanides, but you've got sock accounts as the editor of Uncut Mountain? That seems deceptive to me. Why don't you have a public account where we know who you are, just like people know who I am? And you can't hide behind your cowardice of your anonymous blog posts. But now that we see what you actually teach, the insanity of what you teach, mental instability and insanity, I can see why you have an anonymous profile and multiple sock accounts. And I don't know if he was John the old man on Discord, but probably. And that guy was a legit mental ill loon, if that's the same guy. Which could be, but I don't know. So that's kind of my concluding thoughts about the appropriateness of laity teaching. There have been lay teachers, sure, but there's another element to this which has to do with degree and education. And so on the one hand, this can be exaggerated. This can be an idol. It can be worshipped, credentialism. But on the other hand, if you've never written a paper at all dealing with any relevant topic in these fields, if you've never had a college class on Philosophy 101, if you've never studied any of these topics, how on earth do you feel competent and confident publicly attacking people who do have degrees in those fields? It's weird. First of all, it doesn't make sense in the strata of the hierarchy that is out there, right? In other words, respecting people's accomplishments on the one hand. And secondly, even if you did attain a PhD in Romanides studies, why aren't you publicly able to defend your position? Why do you have to hide behind anonymous accounts, anonymous blogs? This is a tremendous level of cowardice and just passive aggressive weirdness for people to do this. I mean, most people don't have a problem being a public person. So why can't you, if you're going to be in the public sphere, publicly calling me out, publicly attacking me for years? Why can't you do that? I mean, the Roman Catholics are all public apologists. Why are you an anonymous person? And I think as we look at this person's mental illness, we'll see why he's an anonymous person. But, you know, this is so dumb. All of this stuff is just so stupid, so childish. It boggles my mind that, you know, we're here putting all this time and effort into helping thousands of people come into the Orthodox Church, and I have to deal with a mentally ill person obsessing on me for years, creating groups, chat groups, subverting left and right with his gaggle of Skittles people, and then lying about whether he was doing it. And then today saying the most ridiculous, insane stuff I've ever heard from a so-called Orthodox person. I mean, this is embarrassing. Can you, if the Roman Catholics see that and see what this person says and get a whole, and what is going on? This is just nutty. I mean, it's almost like, is there a gigantic portion in the Orthodox sphere of people who are mentally ill? I'm starting to think that there are. And I'm not joking. It might be because a lot of people are told to take their meds. Now, what did we just see in the news today? Crazy old Tom Coombe vindicated that SSRIs don't work. I've met a lot of Orthodox people who were nuts, and then I find out they're on SSRIs. And this erratic, weird behavior and the depression that they go through, and a lot of people tell them to get on the meds. I would not be surprised if John the Pilgrim is not on Prozac or some crazy med, because the way he acts, the way he interacts, the way he posts his schizo blog posts is indicative of many people that I've seen who are on these meds. And why is this person on meds, this loon, the editor at Uncut Mountain Press? So I've got a giant stack of books here we're going to go through, and we're going to cut to the heart of the issue with Romanides. Because as we were talking about earlier, the different temptations of people that come into the church, which I've watched since 2007. Okay, I wasn't in the church in 2007, but I have known and watched and followed and studied in depth Orthodox people since 2007. Who leaves, who comes, who stays? What are the temptations that lead people out of the church? And there's many. In fact, there was a whole Romanides group years ago on Facebook, run by who? Skittles people. Now, that doesn't say anything against Fr Romanides, because they could be misusing his work. But I've watched this for a long time. And so this is not a field I'm ignorant of. I'm not anybody's spiritual advisor. But it doesn't take a whole lot for me to say, let me show you these weird statements and what's wrong here. And if you're somebody like John the Pilgrim, who for whatever reason believes that all of Orthodoxy has to be read through the lens of Fr Romanides, something's off, because you're not able to identify the actual issues and the mistakes. So again, this discussion is not about a judgment on Fr Romanides' status, whether he's heterodox, whether he's not in heaven. I don't know any of that. I don't have any desire to judge that. But I'm going to express the concerns, and I'm going to show you with precision precisely why John the Pilgrim publicly is teaching and has advocated Apollinarianism, how it's an Apollinarian heresy, because of the presupposition that he has from Fr Romanides that's false, relating to the analogy in the Analogia Entis. So let's start with Ancestral Sin, which was the first book that I read from Romanides many years ago. And we're going to talk about the good points. Okay. So today's discussion is not a bashing session. It's a assessment of the pros and cons. And another reason we want to do this is because in the last few weeks, I've seen multiple people confused over original sin, baptism, Romanides, Augustine. Was Augustine right, or is Father Romanides right? And that's a false choice, because they're both wrong. Now, Father Romanides in these issues is more right than Augustine on those topics. However, there are serious problems in saying that you agree with William of Ockham, which Romanides clear as day says. I'm going to show you where he says it. And denying all universals in the quest to deny any analogia. And he is absolutely clear in multiple places that there is no analogia at all, period. So not just is there no analogy to the essence of God, which everybody believes that, he goes a step further and says there is no analogy even to the energies, which come down to us, Basil says. Oh, really? So no naming on the basis of energies. What? I mean, has nobody read St Basil and the Holy Spirit? The whole section on naming the divine? And that we name the energies? How do we name the energies without analogia? If there's no analogia, there's no divine naming. Has anybody read Dionysius? I mean, he wrote a book called Divine Names. Maybe he talks about naming. And do you think he's influential in any other church fathers? Well, of course he is. So to have a PhD person, supposedly getting his PhD in Romanides, sit here and say, following Romanides, that there's no such thing as any analogia is mind-boggling to me. I can't fathom how you could say this. Especially when it is so common amongst the Cappadocians to talk about analogia. I don't understand. I can't fathom this. And it's a serious mistake. And for the people who try to defend him, like this lunatic John Pilgrim, who turn around and say that I've got all the points wrong. And by the way, I'm going to show you where he contradicts himself in his schizo blog post. I mean, Romanides himself, Father Romanides, tells us what he means. He says, I affirm William of Ockham. Ockham's nominalism is my position, and that's why I don't believe in analogia to the energies. And I'm going to show you again how that dumb position would lead to the rejection of dogma in the sense of apodictic logical dogmatics. Pretty sure St. Gregory of Palamas wrote a book that Father Hears is publishing, which, by the way, where is that book? Hasn't that book been on order for years now? I'm just, it is very difficult for me to deal with people who have been attacking for years, and the thing that they're attacking on is so fundamental and so obvious and displays such a profound lack of ignorance, lack of knowledge, and a profound level of ignorance in somebody purporting to be a public teacher that I almost short circuit. I can't understand being that confused and making such a fundamental mistake and then going to the next level and making such a more fundamental mistake in Christology. And I'm going to show you from John the Pilgrim's tweets and from the DMs that he what he means. And it's embarrassing to have somebody this stupid harass me for so many years. And what is the point of this? What is the point of me sending people to you when you let somebody this dumb attack me for years, when you've been made known to this, you've been told this. So you bet I'm mad about that. And I don't disrespect Father Peter Hears at all. I respect him. And I have always supported him 100%. Never criticized him, never said anything bad about him, ever. But this is really unfortunate that he's been, we told him last week that this person is a serious problem. And he said, it's not going to happen. And what did this lunatic do but go nuts today? And I found his blog posts. So it's not just, so it wasn't the case that he let that go. Oh, I'll let that go from years. He didn't let that go. He was in Skittles server for the last 2 years, working with the Skittles people, subverting. And he's a flat out liar. Because he said, I didn't do any of that. I'm not subverting into the work there. What does he goes wild today. Jay is not competent in St. Maximus. There's no such thing as the divine mind. What? Are you gaslighting me, dude? There's no such thing as the term divine mind? You don't understand it. The whole internet doesn't understand this. It means the person of the Father. And he doesn't even understand that when the apologists use that, it's an analogy. That means Romanides is wrong because it's an analogy. It is unbelievable that somebody is this dumb, that somebody is making this fundamental of a mistake and has been allowed to attack and subvert and come at me for years. And this person has zero knowledge of what he's talking about. And all his haughty tweets today about how I have no knowledge of the fathers, I have no knowledge of philosophy. Are you serious, dude? Come on. Even if you think I'm wrong, to say I don't have any knowledge of these topics, I don't have any knowledge of philosophy, dude, come on. I mean, what is wrong with you? What is wrong with so many people in these circles where they feel this obsession to go on these tangents and just go wild? I mean, there's some serious mental illness going on here. And I know it's the demons and all that. Well, I'm not going to give spiritual diagnoses because it's not my position to do that. And I'll bet you $1 million that dude's on meds, because I've seen this so many times, man. I'm not like, as if I haven't dealt with loons. Don't you think I deal with lunatics with the materials that I talk about, the stuff I talk? Don't you think it attracts loons? But the weird part is that the theological topics, somehow they attract more insane lunatic people than the conspiracy stuff. This is what's really sort of missed. I don't understand. This is blowing my mind. You say, well, it's just the demons. It's just, yeah, I know. We can always just say it's the demons, but I don't know. Something else is going on. Maybe it's some sort of a coordinated subversion, perhaps, maybe. I wouldn't be surprised. We know that that does exist, but of course I can't prove that. So thank you for those. But I mean, at a certain point, it's just like, this piety signaling, playing the pious card with me. I mean, come on, man. You're not going to manipulate me with this stuff. You're not going to manipulate me that you're super pious. Come on, man. Just cut the crap, dude. So let's get to this with Father Romanides. Now, the first thing that I wanted to talk about was the book Ancestral Sin, and I want to mention another lunatic that I had to deal with for years, who this lunatic mentions in his articles. Two loons connected. And this lunatic has a degree. I'm not going to name his name, but He's another Romanides scholar who, by the way, created his own publishing company and his own Romanides scholarship company, which is all made up. It was just out of his house. Which, by the way, is that not a grift? I thought that's grifting. Is that not grifting? I don't know. And this lunatic, who, by the way, works at Walmart. So here, this loon who has for years attacked me is a Walmart worker. But I'm sure he's an expert in these philosophical topics and theological topics. Now, he did get a degree, so I'm not knocking him for his degree, but his degree is in philosophy of science. Now, how his philosophy of science degree makes him in any way competent in these other fields, I don't know. But this seems to be a pattern with the Romanides worshippers, where for whatever reason, their bizarre fields of science and biology, that this seems to give them the impression that they're experts in theology. And we're going to see very bizarre statements from Father Romanides, which lends credence to that. Because Father Romanides apparently believed that theology was a kind of science, and it's a form of psychology. Now, depending on what we mean by that, that might not be problematic, right? I mean, Metropolitan Herotios Vlachos and these people, right, who, yes, studied under and was a very close student of Father Romanides. I have many of his books. I don't know if I have all of them, but many of his books in English as well. And I think he's really good. In fact, I think he's better than Father Romanides. But so I don't necessarily disagree with Orthodox psychotherapy, right? I recommended that book to many people for a long time, right? And it's a good book. But the reason that there's a serious thing that we need to address is not that everything these people say is wrong. It's that there are mistakes that a person could adopt and then lead them to something that's heterodox. That's the point. And that is clearly what has happened with John the Pilgrim. So when I was coming out of the Augustinian Thomistic matrix, one of the first books that I read was Ancestral Sin. And at first, when I read it, it was difficult to process. It was so different and so foreign from the Augustinian Thomistic Roman Catholic view that I just couldn't deal with it, right? And I was like, well, if this is the Orthodox view, then I don't think I believe this. So I put it down. Other events happened, other things happened, and I went back to it. And I dug in. I was like, oh, I'm just going to have to deal with this, because I was friends with one of the two loons that I mentioned back at the time in 2006-07. And he really pushed me to work through it. So I worked through the work, and I began to notice areas where he made good arguments. And I started to understand what his argument was. And so, for example, his critique of Thomism was one of the first really solid critiques of Thomism I'd ever read. Now, I hadn't read many of the other Orthodox writers yet, so I didn't know that most of these critiques are in all the other Orthodox thinkers. Logi, Florovsky, Larche, Staniloy, Meyendorff, etc. So even though the chapter critiquing Aquinas and divine simplicity is good, it was the first that really stuck with me. Even though it's in other thinkers, is what I'm trying to say. And I felt like he had a good critique of Origen. I felt like he had a good position on the energies, but some of the things that he talked about still didn't sit right with me. For example, the idea that there's no that God doesn't have any punitive disposition, that nothing is ever punitive. And I remember reading Calamiros's article River of Fire, and a lot of people who were big fans of Romanides were big fans of River of Fire. And you know, over time, the more I imbibed the Orthodox ethos, that makes sense. I believe that the basic idea of St. Maximus of the Eschaton is that that's a much more coherent view of the Eschaton than the Latin view. But what I started realizing was that most of these arguments, many of these arguments, are not new to Father Romanides. Okay, they're in Palamos, they're in Logi, Florovsky, Larche, Staniloy. all the way back to even Cappadocians and Desert Fathers, right? But bizarre statements in the book, such as that justice is not historical. God doesn't have a curse or a justice or a punitive relationship to men in history, is just bizarre, especially when so many, even Eastern Church fathers, especially St. John Chrysostom, speaks so forcefully of the punitive aspect and of justice within history. Okay, so I do think there is a dispositional attitude of justice and an eye for eye on the part of God. In fact, eye for an eye is repeated in the Apocalypse to be consistent even with the lex talionis in Leviticus. So I just think that those statements in Fr Romanides are off. And I think that the easiest explanation, the most charitable reading, is that in critiquing the Augustinian position, in those areas he stepped too far, particularly just on the notion of whether there is a notion of justice or retributive justice in any sense, or, quote, justice in history. And so I do agree that it's a much better attitude to think of God's chastisements as medicinal and remedial. But the idea that there's no retributive justice at all is just bizarre. And I don't think that's correct. And there's so many people, so many church fathers that speak of that in that way. I mean, Basil speaks of this way all the time, that it's weird. And so, and at times, I think he almost, I don't think he was a Marcionite, but I think that sometimes, for example, you guys know that we've critiqued the statements in Logi, which are problematic, right? Logi has these weird phrases like in Dogmatic Theology where he says, the Old Testament God is alone and encapsulated in himself. What? That's not true. It's the triad in the Old Testament. That doesn't make any. That's a Marcionite statement. It was a weird statement. Now, I don't think Logi was a Marcionite. I think that he, said something wrong or worded it bad or whatever. Maybe it's translated bad. I don't know. But there's a couple of those weird statements. There's a couple weird statements I've seen Father Florovsky make where I'm like, what? That's not right. And a lot of times it is people struggling with continuity between the Old and New Testament. And I think there's some places in ancestral sin where we see that, where the stress on what he calls, let's see what he says. He says, for the Jews, the omnipotence and justice of God are an eschatological reality that does not destroy the present freedom of the unrighteous. Now, we would agree with him here against the predestinarianism of Augustine, sure. And I think that's what he's critiquing in this section. This is page 123 of Ancestral Sin. He says, God is long-suffering because he is omnipotent. Judaism, therefore, was not ruled by an Augustinian idea of legalism, and that's a good point. Like, it's important to note that Jews didn't have this Augustinian idea of the meaning of the death and the fall, right? Even like Judaism in the time of Christ, right? And then he says, therefore, it was not ruled by the Augustinian idea of legalism, nor was it lacking that the idea of man's destiny is found beyond his self-interest. And then in the note, he says, Irenaeus argued for the commandments regarding perfection, that they're the same in the Old and New Testament. Exactly. But then he says, Jew did not embrace Judaism or adhere to it in order to escape a punishment on the soul. Much less did any Jew think that there was a retributive justice to God in his religion. Of course they do. What? That's just bizarre. Yes, they did. It was the appointed for the Jews. It was not a means to. I can't read that word. It was not a means to that or any other end. It was the divinely appointed end itself. Wholehearted and whole-souled love for God was its essence. Its duties to God and man were truly accomplished only when done for God's sake or for their own sake, without any regard for self-interested motives. Well, that's just not exactly true, because clearly God motivates people by saying that choose this day whom you will serve, right? In my right hand is life and pleasures everlasting, in my left hand punishment. So you get this all the time in the Old Testament. So I have no idea where he's getting this. I mean, it's just bizarre types of statements like this, that no Jew believed in chastisement or retributive punishment from God. Hell is not a punishment. It's spoken of as a punishment countless times. And so while I don't disagree with the notion of the recapitulation affecting the eschaton and putting it into a more coherent idea where we're all destined to the same eschaton, which is the recapitulation, the way that we will experience that eschaton as ever ill will or ever good will, which is St. Maximus's clear teaching, is a much better teaching than the Western view. But that's not equivalent to saying that there's no such thing as lex talionis or retributive justice. But that is what Romanides says, right? He does say that there is no such thing as lex talionis. But again, that's the later chapters, after the chapters critiquing the essence energy confusion in the Latin view, which is correct. So in other words, all the critiques at the beginning are correct, right? But the problem is that, and he, by the way, he does say in this book, going from memory, that not only is the essence of God, I'm going from memory here, I'm trying to find this. Not only is the essence of God unknowable and incomparable to any creature, the energies are also unknowable and not comparable to any creature. And that's the chief area of serious problem, because the ability to do divine naming and to do dogmatics requires the ability for our created conceptions to match up to the energies. It's not a one-to-one correspondence, but it is an analogia. There's an analogy between the energies which come down to us, Basil says. Basil says we name God by the various energies that come down to us: justice, mercy, love, etc. We do not name his essence. That means the naming is to the energies. Clear as day, 100%. There's no ambiguity in what Basil says in letter 234. And he says it in On the Holy Spirit in that kat epinoia section where he talks about the divine naming. And that is not what Romanides teaches. Father Romanides extends the apophatic theology to the energies as well, and essentially adopts a position that there is no cataphatic theology. That is the problem. You cannot have Orthodox theology and dogmatics denying cataphatic theology. And he 100% does teach that. So don't lie about me saying that I'm making that up. I'm going to show you where he says, I believe Occamism. You couldn't ask for a clearer explication of what his view of the naming is. And he does not speak clearly and precisely on the Logi. So the people who come at me trying to say, you don't understand the depth of his direct perception of God. Well, if he had the direct perception of God, why does he rely on unbelieving higher critics to tell us that the real meaning of Genesis is that it's a made-up Babylonian creation account? So get this. He will tell you in The Sickness of Religion that nobody can read the Bible and understand any of it without the direct theos. In other words, if you're not in theosis, if you're not an elder with the divine light shining out of your eyes, you don't know God and you don't know the Bible, and you can't read the Bible. It doesn't make any sense to you. It will not tell you anything. What? So, but he himself does not claim to have achieved that. Right? But tells us that atheistic scientists are the ones who will teach us the true meaning of Genesis. I'm not joking. He says this. What? But we're not even getting to his belief in aliens yet. And we're going to get into his belief about the swirling vortex over the relics. He believes that you can take scientific gadgets and you can measure the swirling vortex above the relics of the saints to prove. And by the way, he's got this weird teaching about the circulatory fluids. And so he believes hesychasm is not just prayer and quietude. It has to do with kundalini energy. He doesn't call it that, but it's the same teaching of circulatory fluids that are improperly going from the mind to the heart. What? That's what he says in Sickness of Religion. Okay. Again, is it possible that this man he's so beyond us that we can't grasp it? Right? That's what his devotees will say. Oh, he's so beyond you and he's so advanced, you'll never get this. Okay, well, I mean, I'm pretty sure that I understand what a person means when they're an outright nominalist. And that's a quack. And when they tell me that Marxism is good and that there should be more Marxists in Greece, that's a quack, dude. Don't tell me that the Marxist, a guy openly promoting Marxism, is so spiritually advanced that nobody can grasp him or get him, except for these quacks like John the Pilgrim, mentally ill people, who, by the way, are affirming the weirdest heresies I've ever heard today. And you're going to see his heresies in a minute. I'm going to show you everything he said. But these are the people who we're supposed to defer to. You're just supposed to fawn over, unquestionably follow his disciples, because nobody understood orthodoxy correctly except for him. That's how they act. That's how John the Pilgrim acts. And like his schizo level blog post will tell you all you need to know. If you know a man from his disciples, we will look at the disciples of Fr Romanides in regard to this error. I'm not saying everybody, because again, I think Metropolitan Herotheos has great books. I think he's got some really insightful stuff. But that doesn't mean he got everything right. And how are you going to have an apodictic treatise applying the logic of Aristotle to the triad to refute the Latins on the filioque when there's no divine naming or analogia? This is dumb. Am I nuts? Am I the one that's nuts here? Like, I mean, is there something that's just so clear that I'm not getting? Because I don't mind being wrong. I've been wrong many times, but I don't understand how something this fundamental is so confused in so many people's minds. And when I go into depth talking to these people, they can't handle it, man. They go nuts. John the Pilgrim would not talk about this. He wrote a gigantic schizo blog post going nuts on me years ago. And I found out this is who it is. What is wrong with you, man? Do you not understand this is a clear form of mental illness? This is mental illness. And it's the same with James Kelly, his cohort, who has the same mental illness. The Walmart worker. I'm sure he's back there on the fry aisle, though, glowing with the light of God back there. I'm sure. Yeah, I'm sure. But these are the people who, and he says in his article, he talked to James Kelly, and they both talked about how I'm a cult leader. So let's get to, now that we're not really going to get into the ancestral sin, because we're going to see that it's not really an issue, when it comes to the idea of the critique of the Augustinian view about retributive punishment on the basis of infants, right? We know that's all wrong. And we know that St. Photius has an extensive critique where he criticizes this Augustinian error in thinking that infants are guilty for the sin of Adam. So even though the effects of the sin pass on, right, the guilt does not. And by the way, that's the Roman Catholic position. The modern Roman Catholic position today doesn't teach that. But I'm going to show you, contrary to these liars who said that I don't understand, I've never read Romanides. Not only did I read that, we're going to go into his patristic theology from Uncut Mountain Press, by the way. And, you know, as he starts out, the book is good. And when I read this book years ago, I almost wanted to recommend it because it's not a bad book overall. But there's these problems in these sections, which are the root of today's problems. And we're going to see that. So as he progresses through the work, he talks about the importance of noetic prayer. He talks about the stages of purification, illumination, deification. All that's great. No problems there. And then he has this bizarre statement on page 46 where he says, this is where it's the first thing that gets weird, is we don't do apologetics. What? And by the way, Metropolitan Erotios Blakos repeats the exact same thing in his book on person. He says that in terms of modern science, an Orthodox theologian is under no obligation to engage in apologetics. Latins do over the issue of immortality, the existence of a spiritual world, the soul, metaphysical epistemology. No Orthodox theologian is under any obligation. Okay, but we're not under an obligation per se, but does that mean that we don't do apologetics? On the contrary, I would say that he is obligated to not do apologetics. That is, do not engage in apologetics. Do not attempt simply to simply to present the patristic positions. That is, try not to engage in apologetics. So let's look at, first of all, and many of his disciples and these lunatics, like John Pilgrim, did precisely this very thing, where when asked to discuss these things, he called us out morally as morally wrong and messed up for doing apologetics. That was one of the first things that this lunatic said in the Discord, was that we shouldn't do apologetics. And I am more pious than you because I don't do apologetics. And look, here my master, Fr Romanides, told me not to. You're a sinner and I'm better than you. You're all cult leaders. And look how pious I am. This is exactly what he did. And who is at all convinced by this? This is ludicrous. You can't, I mean, what in the world? I mean, what do you think these works are? What do you think these thousands of pages are behind me? How on earth do you think that thousands of pages of Eastern and Latin church fathers doing apologetics is not what we should do? And do you know what these slimeball spiritual Pharisees say? You're not a church father. I never thought it was. Of course I don't think I'm a church father. But you know good and well that they are examples. Have you ever heard of Justin the philosopher? Do you know his icon says that? Justin the philosopher, I have his icon in there. It says Justin the philosopher. Do you know what he wrote? The Apollo. Here you have him telling you, don't do apologetics. Now, these people are going to say, well, it's a certain conception that we have to avoid, and you need to understand the phronema and the ether. I know all that. I've heard it for 15 years. Okay, so we know. We know that it is not the method of natural theology. It's not the method of doing the pure rational apologetics of the Latins. And so I know that, and I agree with that. But that is false. It is not true that we don't do apologetics, and I can keep going. There's a 1,000-page book by St. Gregory Nyssa against Eunomius. Gigantic work is nothing but the most obscure, the most precise, the most wild, deep philosophical debate you have ever read in your life. But don't do apologetics. This is embarrassing. I mean, it is embarrassing to have this person touted as something no Orthodox person can even understand. He's so beyond everybody, we can't understand it. But he says don't do apologetics. Number one, that's embarrassing. As he moves on, he talks about analogia, and this is where you have the first statements that are going to be problematic. Now, he does a thing where he talks about empiricism. And he has another book, or a couple books, where he talks about empirical dogmatics. And that's printed by St. Vladimir Seminary Press. I don't have a physical copy of that, but I have looked at that. And again, the first thing I think that's being confused here is that I'm not sure if he understands the difference between experience and existential experience and empiricism, because he seems to think that the Orthodox idea of the direct experience of God is the same thing as empiricism. That's not what empiricism is. But I'm concerned because the way he talks about his acceptance of empiricism is identical to the empiricism of Marxists, atheists, and David Hume. So this doesn't make any sense, because I know these positions very well. I studied under Marxists. My grad guy has Marxistolic succession from the Frankfurt School. So I know what Marxism teaches, and I know what David Hume teaches. And Orthodox theology is not David Hume's empiricism. Now, I know that Fr Romanides does not limit it, but he does say, as we will see in his essay touting Marxism, his essay touting Marxism, we will see him say that. And this is very problematic. So stop downplaying his mistakes and his serious errors and lying about me and coming at me when everybody knows I studied under Marxists and I oppose Marxism. Now we examine the entire patristic tradition, and we know that the fathers call it idolatry to have any expressions or conceptions about God. No, they don't. That is not true. This is the section where he begins on page 69 of Patristic Theology to talk about how any analogia is idolatry. And he says the exact same thing in The Sickness of Religion, which I've read. And I've read the work, his thing on the Franks. By the way, that's good. I agree with him on the Franks. So don't sit there and tell me I haven't read Romanides. I have. But he says that because God is uncreated, you cannot express him through concepts. We can use names, but here let's see how he says we can use names. When we say God is good, bountiful, etc., this practice is, strictly speaking, not proper. That's not true. Where does Basil say in letter 234 that the divine naming is improper? Let's see what St. Basil says. Now, how many times have we used this classic argument against the Roman Catholics? 1,000,000 times. And this is Basil's most concise, simple, classic way of talking about divine naming. And by the way, he goes into more depth in this book, and you can read the Radagolowicz PhD thesis where he talks extensively about Eunomius' position being nominalist. So Eunomius has a nominalist position, about the same position as Fr Romanides' position on naming God. That's in the Radagolowicz PhD thesis. So you want to keep defending Romanides on this point. You sure you want to do that? You sure about that? Basil confronted a form of nominalism in his day in the figure of Eunomius. And if you've read Basil Against Eunomius, right? So if you don't want to read the 800 pages, 1,000 pages of St. Gregory Nyssa against Eunomius, you can read a much smaller book called St. Basil Against Eunomius. And if you come over to, if you have the Catholic University Press version, if you come over to Kat Epinoia, page 96, this is section 1567. This is a difficult distinction that Dr. Bradshaw has a really long paper on called Essence, Energy, What Kind of Distinction? Okay, and this gets into Kat Epinoia, right? Distinction in terms of mental distinction, distinction in terms of only mental distinction, Distinction in terms of mental and real. And Basil chastises Eunomius for thinking that the names are only conceptual. This was crucial to Eunomius' thesis, that when you name the divine, those names are all just describing one simple identical thing. This is called identity thesis. Identity thesis means that the names ascribed to the divine are identical and reducible. So let's be clear that it is Basil who does not have the nominalist position. And I'm going to show you another book that just came out. Scholarship. This is a figure, recognized expert in the field of Christology in this period. Zach Huber, Rise of Christian Theology and the End of Ancient Metaphysics. Guess what this book is about? Nature, universals, essences, one and many, the particular, individual, and the universal, common, primary substance, secondary substance, during the period of the patristics, all the way up to St. John Damascus and St. Maximus at the end. And now, do you think there's a single church father who teaches nominalism? Because this alone will refute Romanides on this whole point. This puts an end to this whole dumb debate. Because he will hinge his position on his acceptance explicitly in this book of nominalism in the Occamist sense. Do you think any of the people in the first 700 years of the church taught nominalism? Oh, wait a minute, but somebody did teach nominalism. His name was Eunomius, and he's identified as teaching a form of Eunomianism in this book, as well as explicitly in the Radagowitz thesis on Basil's doctrine of simplicity. In other words, according to Eunomius, says St. Basil, every name that is applied to God is an interchangeable name, and thus a nominalist name, which only describes that one singular essence. Basil's response then is to refute this version of nominalism with a form of analogia, which names the energies. Does that mean that naming the energy is a one-to-one correspondence? Of course not. Nobody thinks that. That would be univocal, right? It's not univocal. That would be weird and blasphemous. Who thinks that the created love that I have between Father and Son, the created love that exists there, who thinks that that's identical in a metaphysical sense to the love between God the Father and his sons? Of course not. That's crazy. But doesn't Jesus use that analogy? If you, being wicked, know how to give good gifts to your son, how much more the Father who loves you can he give good gifts even to the wicked and to you? Did you notice that that's an analogy? That Jesus uses an analogy between the love of the Father for his sons, God the Father and his sons, compared to, analogous to, the love of a human father for his son. I mean, this is not rocket science to say that there is an analogy there. It's not even controversial. It's embarrassing for people who claim to be this advanced, claim to be this expert level, to make such a fundamental, silly mistake. And you don't have to go far in the church fathers. You don't have to spend 15 years reading the Eastern Fathers to figure this out. You could read one book and figure out that Basil uses analogia as a key way to refute Eunomius. Now, how else does this refute Eunomius? Well, Basil has to stress that the names that we give to God clearly pick out different energies. The name love can't be identical to the name Father. The name justice can't be identical to the name love, because then we would be teaching absolute divine simplicity and the Roman Catholic view, which does teach a reductionist view. So the very argument that Basil hinges his Trinitarian defense against Eunomius itself refutes Fr Romanides because it relies on analogy. And how is anybody with PhDs and THDs in Orthodoxy not aware of this? Who does not know that? How could you not know this? It's embarrassing. Basil goes on to say that if you think that all of these names are interchangeable and only name the divine essence, he says you're a fool. That's the Eunomius position. I know Romanides is not teaching Eunomianism, but he has the exact same nominalist position of naming. Because the name that picks out love has to be picking out something really distinct and matching up to that in an analogous way, not a one-to-one way, an analogous way that distinguishes from picking out of justice as an energy. And that's distinguished from person who has those energies. I mean, think how silly this is. This is so silly. To think that you can't, I mean, the tomos of the Palamite synods, okay, you read those, the tomos, it explicitly condemns the position that's saying that the reality that is love is identical to the reality that is justice. That is condemned in the Palamite synods, word for word. That means you cannot be a nominalist in the divine naming. You have to say the divine names do name really distinct things. We name the things around God. We name the things around God. How could you do that if this dumb position was correct? And I'm going to talk about, I know what St. Gregory Palamas says, that we go beyond the conceptions. That does not mean the conceptions are bad. How could he write an apodictic treatise that Uncut Mountain Publishing is supposed to publish for years now that hasn't been out? How could he write that treatise using Aristotelian logic if what Romanides says is correct? Do I think that logic explains or exhausts the Trinity? Of course not. Nobody thinks that. That's crazy. Maybe Roman Catholics think that, but no, of course we don't think that. But Romanides is very clear, and that's just one of the places. We're going to keep seeing where he goes with this. And I'm sorry to say this, and I'm not being arrogant, and I don't, you know what? I don't have to keep teaching theology. I don't have any desire to be a theological teacher. And so if my last talk on this is to point out that this is embarrassing, that people teaching don't know this, then so be it. Romanides says that we can't use these words because the only way to know God is through direct perception and theosis. And so really these words don't tell us anything. Well, it's true that that's what we do. Eventually we get to that, Lord willing, by grace. But that doesn't mean that the lower discussion and the lower theology of conceptual frameworks is bad or false. That would be silly. So these people are taking the fact that the naming is not an end in itself. It is not an exhaustive conceptualizing. It's just a human way of speaking about God, but it does match up to the thing that's picked out. I mean, imagine thinking that love doesn't actually pick out a divine energy. I mean, of course it does. And the only reason you would think this is the other mistakes in Fr Romanides of his empiricism and his Marxism and those tendencies in that direction. The nominalism. This is not rocket science. If you adopt nominalism, you're going to say those things. You're going to have the same position as Eunomius on divine naming. And there's not a single person out there competent in philosophy who will disagree with it. Go ask Dr. Bradshaw and see what he says. I guarantee you he will say that what I'm saying is correct. Romanides says that this explains that what is ascertained during the experience of theosis will be that God is not unity, God is not one, God is not Trinity. No, I'm sorry, but theosis does not remove the dogmatic truths. So that's not true. I mean, I understand his point that Palamas says theosis and the divine light and the transcending of the conceptions does not mean that the conceptions are relativized and useless. That's not true. That's false. That's a dialectic. And that's where Romanides is wrong. He's dead wrong. I don't see how people can't see this. Now he goes on to say We should critique Aristotle's unmoved mover God. I totally agree with that. Yep, great point. And then he goes on to say that I'm not going to go into the Imago Dei problem, but let's skip over to the problem of no language. This is where he gets more explicit about there is no inspired text, and language doesn't tell us about God. There's no divine language with which God speaks to man. There is also no way to discern which words are appropriate for theology and which words are not. That's what Eunomius says. Okay, Romanides says this right here on page 81. This is gibberish. I mean, come on. This is embarrassing. So all these books over here, Uncut Mountain Press, you're printing books that don't tell us anything, according to him. Now he talks about in this section Eunomius, and he says that Eunomius made the mistake of thinking that we could name the divinity. That's not exactly what Eunomius' mistake is. Eunomius' mistake, he says the Eunomians believed in a divine language that God revealed to the prophets, and this included the names for God. Now, then he says that the scriptures then tell us the concepts that extend in a univocal sense to God. That's correct, right? So Eunomius, even though he was a nominalist, he said that the names do really tell us what that is, but it's just one thing. So they're interchangeable. So if you say Father, if you say the One, if you say God, those are all just expressing that one monad. So they're interchangeable. And he says that these names correspond to the reality that is God. So that is called univocal predication. That's predication in one sense, an identical sense, a one-to-one correspondence. But that's not correct. And Basil's response is not to say that there's no name that corresponds to God. Basil says that there's no name that corresponds to the essence. The names correspond to the energies. And that is what Romanides says is not true. He rejects that. Do you worship what you know? I answer, I worship what I know. And then they will reply, talking about the Eunomians, what is the essence of what you worship? So the Eunomians thought you had to know the divine essence to name it. And they thought they did know it. Then, if I confess I am ignorant of the divine essence, they turn to me and say, then you don't know what you worship. I answer that the word to know has many meanings. If we say that we know the greatness of God, the power of God, his wisdom, his goodness, his providence, his justice, his judgment, but not his essence. The question then is therefore only put for the sake of dispute. For who denies that he knows the essence? He who denies that he knows the essence does not confess himself to be ignorant of God, because our idea of God is gathered from the attributes which I have enumerated. Our idea of God is gathered from the attributes which I listed, the energies. Basil uses operation here. Operation means energy. But God, Eunomius says, is simple, and whatever you say of him is reckoned as knowable of his essence. That's the Eunomian position. But what absurdities are involved in this sophism? What absurdities are involved in the position that you also can't name or know the energies? And that's the Romanides position. The image of God. This is a bizarre point, according to Romanides. So to be consistent with this position, Romanides says that Adam is not the image of God. Only Christ is the image of God. What? I'm pretty sure that icons are the image of God. Do you understand that the silliness of this dumb position would undercut the notion that icons are images of the divine? Every icon is teaching you about the uncreated. That does not mean that the icon is the uncreated. It's directing you to the uncreated. It is picking out the uncreated. But Romanides, clear as day, says the image of God is Christ. Even Adam is not the image of God. I'm pretty sure the Bible says we are made in the image of God and we lack the likeness. Romanides says no. And why does he say that? Clear as day. In the epistemology of the fathers, nothing in the created world is an image of God. What? Pretty sure Christ is the image of God and he has a created human nature. I'm pretty sure that I'm the image of God. I mean, this is the whole philosophy of iconography. But do you understand that there's a connection between iconography, the Bible, and the created world? Maximus says that the created world is a veil the Logos wears. It's a theophanic manifestation. How are they theophanic manifestations if the created does not image the divine? I mean, this is so absurd. And all of the people worshiping him need to hear this, and they need to know this, that they're making they're being silly, okay? Because he goes on to say that all he does is confuse the fact that we can't name the essence of God by saying that we also can't name the energies of God. That's the whole mistake. Do you not see how silly this is? And naming the energies does not say you're defining the energies. This is so silly. And it gets even worse when he talks about the Logi. He's really bad on this. Has little to no understanding at all of what St. Maximus says. And that's why, by the way, you'll notice today in John the Pilgrim, when we get to him, wait till you see the ludicrous stuff that John Pilgrim says about the divine mind. He has no idea what he's talking about. I mean, it's going to be crazy level stuff. So I'm going to have to get the power cord and get a drink of water. So we're not going anywhere. I'll be right back. And I'm not stopping anytime soon. We got a lot to get through. We're going to get through all this stuff. I'm going to show you all the places where St. Maximus talks about Christ recapitulating the universals. That alone refutes Romanides, who says there are no universals. He says there's none. They don't exist. It's a made-up Platonic Augustinian thing. And this alone will settle this issue and silence all these people in their silliness. Because I've had enough of these people, man. I've been dealing with this dumb Romanides stuff since 2007, and these quacks, these kooks. And so this needs to be known, right? This needs to stop. This is years of this stupid stuff. People can't even understand analogia. I mean, come on, man. All right, so now, because he has an issue with any notion of imaging or iconographic representation in the created world, yes, you heard me right, an Orthodox patristic person literally saying that there's no created images of the divine. I mean, how you could in any way reconcile this with iconography, I have no idea. I mean, this is just... But he goes on to talk about the Logi, And he has to divest the Logi of any notion of image or form. Now, I mean, this is laughable because St. Maximus is not the first person to talk about the Logi, first of all, right? So this comes from the Logos Pragmatikos, right? The seeds of the Logos everywhere. And this is a specific doctrine that we have gone into great depth to cover in the last 10 years. I have almost everything about Maximus in English. I worked through a significant portion of those. I've not read everything, but I've worked through almost all of it, including the secondary works. There's a couple books I've not yet gotten because they're pretty expensive. And that does not make me an expert. But I guarantee you I know more than this clown. And we're going to see that in a minute. This embarrassing himself. Coming after me for years. And you keep pushing me, man. I don't put up with this stuff, man. And by the way, he's talking about Masonry, which is weird in this section. Freemasons, which is odd. Melitios Metaxakis, who's a Mason. It's weird. But this is where it starts to get really problematic. And he says that I'm telling you the true hesychasm. Okay, this is page 110. He says that the true hesychasts of the future are going to be seen as liberals. What? Why would we be seen as liberals? Oh, he says because they're going to understand that the Bible is not inspired. And the Bible's not inspired because that's a fundamentalist doctrine. I mean, imagine thinking that divine inspiration and inerrancy, by the way, is a fundamentalist invention. Pretty sure every church father I've seen comment on the inspiration of the scriptures calls them inerrant and inspired. In fact, St. Jerome talks about this all the time. St. Gregory Palamas says every single letter is inspired. But according to Romanides on page 110, the true hesychasts will understand that he was the true hesychast and that they'll be seen as liberals because they will understand that the Bible's not inspired. No, that's what he says. He says the Bible's not inspired. Page 109, or excuse me, 110, 111. You don't understand. You don't understand. You're taking your fundamentalist presuppositions. You don't understand what he means. No, I understand what he means because he tells me what he means. And he says that the Babylonian creation myth is the basis for Genesis 1. Oh, really? Really? In fact, the very next page, he says that the science of higher criticism has proven that the Bible's not inspired. So the true hesychast relies on atheist higher critics who have told us and proven the Bible's not inspired. I mean, give me a frickin' break. You got duped by this guy. Now, is he saved? I don't have any judgment on that. I don't have any judgment on whether he is what he is. I don't have that. But I can tell you, I understand what words mean. There is no so-called literal divine inspiration of the Bible. Science has created a serious problem when it comes to overturning the positions found in the Bible. I mean, he's unambiguous right there. Thus, there's no conservative position, he says, on inspiration. We must submit to science, secular, unbelieving science, and higher criticism, who have disproven the Bible. So, note the irony and the silliness of this position. The guy who says that you can't understand the Bible because it doesn't teach you about God, it uses created things that can't tell you about the uncreated. The only way to understand the Bible is through having the divine light directly, theosis. By achieving that, then you understand the Bible, which is not inspired. So do you see the absurdity of this contradiction? On the one hand, he tells us that we go to unbelieving academics to understand the true meaning of Genesis, who have disproven the Bible, But also, the only way to understand the Bible is through having the divine. So, do the atheist skeptics, academics, have the uncreated light? Is that what we're supposed to conclude? That's the conclusion I'd be led to with this dumb argument? And then it gets worse. If you've read enough of him, you will be able to pick out the psychobabble, where under the cloak of spirituality, he's just using psychobabble. Orthodoxy is not a religion. Religion is equivalent to superstition. Well, what are you talking? Who defined religion as superstition? Okay, I mean on the true religion. It's not superstition, right? Religion just means worship of God. A religious person, however, is superstitious. They have fantasies about God. They superstitiously believe religion helps them and helps them to cope with the problems of this world, simply because they're afraid of death. Humans suffer from poverty, and thus they become psychologically insecure. This is why people turn to religion. Religion is not the monopoly of the poor. And then he goes on to say that Marxists, of course, a Marxist can't understand this because they think that if you eradicate poverty, you will free man. Because religion would serve then no purpose in his life. Communism promises the moon. All it takes is for those who govern in communism to put into practice this correctly. Of course, this is an idea as a community of equality in communism is attractive. What? The idea of community and equality in communism is attractive. The idea of community and equality in communism is attractive. However, it can't be realized in this way. Now, we're going to see some other things he says about Marxism too that are going to help us understand what he means. Then he says, if you think about it, heretics are like quacks. They're quacks because they offer healing to the problem of religion, but they don't have a way to heal man. Now, that could be true depending on what he means, but it is not the case that religion is equivalent to superstition. And we're going to see in his cure of sickness what he means by that, because he goes into greater detail there. But let's get to the crux of it. What does he think is the fetish and the obsession of religion that needs to be cured? Can you guess what it is? It's called analogia. What is the problem in religion? We have already mentioned that the fact that there is no similarity at all between God and creatures. Yes, there is. Not at the level of essence, but there is at the level of energy. And this absence of any similarity means that there is no analogia at all between creatures and the uncreated. Now, what is the metaphysical approach to theology? In order for metaphysics or ontology in theology to have some kind of analogy, there has to be some analogy made between the creature and the uncreated. Western philosophical theological tradition has two different such analogies or correlations in contrast with Orthodox theology. This is an oversimplification because, first of all, it is not his position and the Protestant and the Augustinian position. But that's how he cashes it out, as you'll see, because he'll talk about analogia entis and analogia fide, the Thomistic and the Protestant conceptions. But he does not accurately state what the Orthodox position is, because he equates his position of saying that the energies are also unknowable and inexpressible with the Orthodox position. That's not the Orthodox position. That's where he's wrong. We cannot use any created thing as a means for knowing the uncreated or the energies. Page 126. We cannot use any created thing for knowing the uncreated or even the energies. So note very clearly what he means and to what extent he extends this denial of cataphatic theology exclusively. There's no cataphatic theology at all. I mean, he goes so far as to say that Adam is not even the image of God. I mean, what? Everybody knows in Orthodox theology that we have lost the likeness, but we retain the image. That alone refutes this quack. Now, the West has traditionally accepted two forms of analogy: the analogy of being, analogia entis, and the analogy of faith, analogia fide. The followers of Augustine, Aquinas, defended the notion of analogy of being. That's correct. Augustine himself employed both analogies and conferred the philosophical method of inquiry into church dogmas and biblical inquiry. In his investigations, he included both the Bible and philosophical speculation in his logical analysis. Correct. And he doesn't go into Calvinism, but analogia fide is the Protestant idea that we have the analogy of faith. So that's that epistemology. This is the most damning section right here. It makes very clear, and I want you, John Pilgrim, to stop coming at me and stop lying when you hear what he says. William of Ockham made a very important contribution to the history of the development of Western theology. He is the father of nominalism. He wrote a comprehensive, damning critique of the analogy of being. Nominalism rejects every type of distinction between divine essence and attribute. In other words, between essence and energy. And maintains that distinction is only in a name, nominalism. William of Ockham helped create a school of thought that did not accept any analogy of being between the created and the uncreated. He taught that philosophy is incapable of helping us to discover knowledge about God. Using the very powerful philosophical arguments, he wrote a damning critique of the acceptance of universals. This is a refutation of the Platonic tradition, he says, and nearly extinguished the earlier schools of all Western Platonists. In doing so, he instigated a crisis in Western theology. This is extremely significant for Romanides, Orthodox theology. Since the Orthodox Church officially condemned Plato and Neoplatonic teachings on the archetypes at the Synodicon, that's not true. The Synodicon condemns Plato's archetypes. It does not condemn St. Maximus's doctrine of the Logi as divine ideas and archetypes. So if you want to sit there and tell me that the Logi doctrine of St. Maximus is a condemned heresy, that is insane. And that is what these people will be led to. That is what they will say. In fact, John the Pilgrim says that what I say is the condemned heresy of the Synodicon, because this guy says it. Okay, John the Pilgrim has no knowledge of any of the stuff that he's talking about. All he's doing is repeating what he read here, because he's a fraud. John the Pilgrim is a fraud. And I want you to understand, he's saying Occam is right. The Sunday of Orthodoxy mocked the remembrance of the condemnation of Plato and Neoplatonists. That's true. It's not a condemnation of archetypes. I mean, has anybody read Ambiguum 7? I mean, years ago, when I first encountered these lunatics coming at me over this, and the first thing I said to them was, what about Ambiguum 7? They didn't know what it was. And then when you tell them to go read Ambiguum 7, which is the most famous about the Logi, by the way, I'm going to show you, again, easy refutations in the Ambigua of these people, because the Logi are called archetypes in the divine mind, which John the Pilgrim says there's no such thing as a divine mind. It's the person of the Father. Lunatic, literal heresy, Apollinarianism. And he misunderstands the liturgical text that he's citing as proof text, by the way. You're going to see how embarrassing this person is, this editor. Maximus says that Jesus in the incarnation, as the macrocosm of the microcosm, recapitulates all the universals. Oh, how are you going to recapitulate universals when there are no universals? Get this. He defines Plato's doctrine as the idea that there are archetypes in the divine mind. So he's literally saying that Maximus's definition of the Logi is Plato's position and is condemned as a heresy. This is embarrassing. This is embarrassing to all of these people, these zealots who have been after me for years about this dumb issue that they don't understand and that I dove into for years to solve this problem because of these people attacking. And this lunatic is continuing this from this other lunatic from 2007. So there you see clearly that he says, clear as day, we must reject any idea that there are archetypes in the divine mind, because this would mean there's analogia. Again, he says it clear as day. On account of analogia, it has to be rejected because there is none. Thus, the human reasoning cannot penetrate to the essence of any created thing. And again, he talks about the problem of universals. And he thinks that if you talk about Logi in this way, you're a Platonist. That's not Platonism. Okay, Platonism is not equivalent to cataphatic theology. The Synodicon is not condemning St. Maximus' position. It's condemning the position that the Logi are archetypes in the divine essence. Maximus, following all of the Cappadocians, and Gregory Nyssa says that in the eschaton, we will know the things around God. And in this life, we know the things around God. Those are the energies and the Logi. They're really distinct. The names name them. I mean, how can there be a Logi of me in the mind of God if there's no analogia between the Logi in the mind of God and me? And what this exposes is that none of these people have actually read St. Maximus. And yet they want to sit there and come after me for years and talk about how I'm a heretic and a cult leader. And they are embarrassing themselves. They haven't even read Ambiguum 7. And when he does do his schizo post, all he does is try to reword it and restate it. And it shows that if he had gone even deeper, he would know that Maximus says Christ recapitulates all the universals. Your master says there are no universals. That proves I'm right. And you're wrong. And you, because you've been hiding behind this stuff, that's why I'm publicly calling you out. For years, man. So you have the explicit affirmation of nominalism. And we're going to see that he applies this nominalism elsewhere as well. Now, if anybody has read The Divine Names by Dionysius, what do the names name? I mean, this is 101 if you had read this. Okay, one of the most famous patristic works in the history of the church, The Divine Names. What do the names name? Within the first few chapters, you would have learned that the names name the processions. He calls the processions the energies or the rays, and in naming God, we name the energies and the rays that proceed from him. That's the very thing Romanides says clear as day in multiple places we don't do. How could the whole universe be a theophanic liturgical manifestation if there's no analogia? How can we name and do theology at all if there's no analogia? Now, does naming mean that the names are exhaustive or definitional? Of course not. Who has ever said that? I've never heard that. But I mean, this is embarrassing, guys. I'm not trying to be mean or rude to you or haughty or prideful. This is something all of you should have read. All of you should have read this book. Not me, you. I mean, the name of the book is The Divine Names. Okay? I mean, it says that we name the goodness, the beauty, the love, because those are the rays that come down to us. And I mean, am I just insane? And I have never understood any of this. It's just all, even though I've put since 2007 massive amounts of time in it. I've got an entire shelf there, an entire shelf here on this topic. I mean, again, help me understand how beyond your schizo blog post, I've never understood what is everywhere in the church fathers. I mean, it shouldn't be up for debate that they talk about analogia. Every Cappadocian covers this. I mean, we've lectured through almost all the works of Basil. I've read all the orations of St. Gregory Nazianzus. I've read almost all of Nyssa's Against Eunomius. And all of those works often use analogia. This is embarrassing, man. I'm sorry, but this is embarrassing. So, by the way, he teaches the essence synergy distinction. And you know what else he says? He says that there are the Logi, and the Logi that exist in the divine mind are exemplars. So you should have understood that there's no difference between the Latin teaching before the schism, the pre-Latin teaching of exemplars is no different than what Maximus means by the Logi. Now, eventually, these are understood in different ways. But the basic idea is the same, exemplarism. He calls this is translated as the Logi are exemplars. So all John the Pilgrim did was tell me that he hasn't even read one of the most basic texts in the Orthodox Church. And then do you know what he says in the next section? He says the Logi exist in the divine mind. The divine mind. This is embarrassing, man. Embarrassing. Screenshot it. He goes on to say in that very section that we do cataphatic and apophatic theology. We do cataphatic because the names name the energies or the processions. And we do apophatic because we don't name the essence of God. It's impossible. And so he essentially teaches the exact same thing of the pre-existent Logi in the divine mind as what St. Maximus teaches, that there are pre-existent archetypes and Logi in the divine mind. Exact same position. In fact, Maximus probably draws from this. And if you've not read the Divine Names, John the Pilgrim, which you clearly haven't, go read chapter 7. Because the whole section is about the divine mind, which you said doesn't exist. Unbelievable. Unbelievable I have to deal with this. I mean, the reason that I'm mad about it is because it's a person who has done this for so long and is so stupid about this and so childish and lied to his boss and went at it today. Wait till you see what he said. I mean, he really embarrassed himself today. All right, so moving on beyond the divine names, this shouldn't be questionable as to whether there are universals, okay? Any text that would introduce you to the philosophy of the Church Fathers, particularly the Cappadocians, let me give an example. Christianity and Classical Culture by Jaroslav Pelikan. Pelikan would have entire chapters that would help you out, John, because you don't know anything about this, where he deals with their metaphysics and their epistemology. What is the usage of the Cappadocians when it comes to universals? By the way, do you understand that if they believed in universals and utilized that for their Trinitarian theology, that refutes the idea that there's no universals? They believe in the universal. There's nobody in the patristic period except Eunomius who has the Alchemist position that there's no universals. And this alone shows that Fr Romanides is wrong, fundamentally wrong. This is just the easiest thing to go to. There's a whole chapter in this book called The One and the Many. That alone would tell you how that works at that time period. But if you want to go into more scholarly depth, you can go deeper into this in the Zach Huber book on Christian theology and ancient metaphysics. And I'll give you some of the pages where he covers it. So if you want to know about the Cappadocian doctrine of universals, you could read this on page 60 and 61, where he goes into, I think, Nyssa, that section. And by the way, goes into a lot of depth about the image and likeness. That would mean that Romanides is wrong. Next, there's the section later on about universals in the Cappadocians, pages 78 and 79. Moving on to the section later on of St. Maximus's view of universals. In many places throughout his work, Maximus makes it clear that for him, the relationship between the individual and their species and genera is one of concrete complementarity. The species, which encompasses the individuals, and the genera, which encompasses the species, contain the level of less universal being, but they also preserve them in their specific dignity. Universals would therefore, according to Maximus, be impossible without the individuals from which they are constituted. It would, however, be equally wrong to say or to imply that individuals could exist or sustain themselves without their species or the genera. Rather, like Gregory of Nyssa, Maximus insists on the ontological reality of the universals. Like Gregory of Nyssa, Maximus insists on the ontological reality of the universal. That refutes everything that you're talking about right there, that alone. So that shows us that he is misunderstanding what the Synodicon is condemning. Moving on to John of Damascus towards the end of the book. This is page 305. In Leontius, we had encountered a view of an individual nature as the collection of all the properties, including those determining the individual hypostases. I have argued that in Leontius, were distinct from the individual natures merely by use of their concrete existence. It hardly needs pointing out that John of Damascus's own account of hypostasis does not merely facilitate an analogous solution. It calls for one. Thus, then, is the nature of Christ assumed. It is thus universal nature, modified by the addition of individual properties. Christ assumed universal human nature. It is fundamental Christology that for Christ to assume everybody's human nature, there's got to be universals. Hello? So he assumed universal human nature because there's universals. How else could he do that? How could he be the universal person, the universal man, if there's no universals? And if there are universals, then Romanides is wrong. Despite this addition, it remains identical with the nature present in all of the human hypostases. Exactly. So we're not talking about a nature out there floating. The nature that's universal exists in all of the human beings. And that's how Christ is connected to every human being. And that's what's called recapitulation. So how are you going to have recapitulation when there's no universals? Because if there's no universals, there's no universal nature for Christ to recapitulate. And by the way, Maximus doesn't just say that he recapitulates universal human nature. He says Christ recapitulates all universals, which means he believes in universals. If you had read the Ambigua, which you haven't, you would know that there's multiple places where he discusses universals. In fact, the recapitulation is discussed in Ambigua 41. And although you won't be able to understand Ambigua 41 because you don't have any understanding of these topics, it's one of the more difficult and very dense of these Ambigua. But in Ambigua 41, he goes into in what way the universals exist. And he says that the universals are created as well as the particulars. And he says that God sustains all of the universals in existence by his act of creation. That means they exist. So there's a whole ambiguity on the existence of universals. And you've got people telling me that we're supposed to accept the Occamist position that there are no universals. Give me a break, dude. Give me a freaking break. I think Ambigua 10 also covers this. So let's see Ambigua 10. Ambigua 10 is also very difficult, notoriously difficult. But it does talk about the Logi in depth. And notice John the Pilgrim had no knowledge. He doesn't know anything about this. Okay, so the guy telling you about the Logi doesn't know anything about where to find this in Maximus. Doesn't know anything about what Maximus teaches. Never read this stuff. Guarantee you he hasn't read it. I mean, he would know this, right? This wouldn't even be up for debate if you had read this. The created symbols of the created world and created order point us to the Logi. Do you hear that? That is Ambigua 10. Go read Ambigua 10, John. Ambigua 10. The created point us to the Logi. In fact, the natural laws that we see in nature also point to the Logi. So creatures image the uncreated. The Logi are not creatures. You understand that? The Logi are the divine reasons in the divine mind. Ambigua 10. This is Maximus's order of contemplation according to Ambiguum 10. This is how we are directed to God, through this order of being. Okay, this is not what you say. Notice here that the creatures point us to their principles, the principles behind the creatures, the essences, the forms, the universals. These point us to the Logi, and the Logi point us to the Logos. Okay? But you are talking about people who don't know the metaphysics of St. Maximus, never read this book, spent years coming at me, and if he had read any of Maximus, he would know that this is a fundamental structure of how Maximus's theophanic worldview operates. That the created realities, what he calls natural contemplation, point us to the principles behind the natural order, which then direct us to the Logi, which are the patterns and archetypes in the divine mind behind those things, which then direct us to the Logos. As he moves on towards the end of 10, is where he says that what we know about God are the things around him. The things around him. How could you name the things around him if you couldn't do analogia? Anyway, so there's more about the Logi and the created order, particularly the sections about universal in particular is towards the end of Ambiguum 10. Ambiguum 10 is really long. Okay, so as you get to the end, he will go back into the universals and the particulars. By the way, we did a whole interview with Torstein Tollefson, and we talked about the idea of universals being created. So Maximus believes that universals can perish. There's a whole section in the PhD thesis where he covers this. And so that's why this is not a Platonic position. Plato thought that universals are not created. They're synonymous with their forms. They're synonymous with the monad. They're not created. Maximus has a unique twist where he talks about, number one, he makes the Logi, the exemplars, personal. They're not self-subsisting forms in the monad. They're not self-subsisting causes, impersonal causes. The Logi, which are what Plato's forms were about, are transformed into being inhypostatic. That means they're made personal. They're the personal thought forms of the Logos in the divine mind, as Dionysius says. which John the Pilgrim thinks is a made-up term. These lunatics think I made up the term divine mind. I mean, unbelievable. It is so fundamental to Christology that Christ has two minds: divine mind, human mind. This lunatic says Christ's divine mind is the person of the Father. Unbelievable. I'm not joking. You're going to see what he says. And he's confused because he doesn't understand the analogy that's used for apologetic reasons. When the church fathers make an analogy to the mind is like the Father, the Logos is the Word. You see that? That's just an analogy, which number one refutes Romanides, who says there's no analogies and no analogia. Okay? That does not mean that in the analogy you identify the person of the Father with the divine mind. That is dumb. That is a fundamental Trinitarian heresy. That is so silly. It's actually Apollinarianism. So it's applying a faculty or a trait of nature, mind, and reducing that or identifying that with the person. Christ's mind is not the person of the Father. It's embarrassing. You're embarrassing yourself. Anyway, Maximus goes on to refute Origen by making that very point in the rest of the Ambigua in Volume 1, by pointing out that Origenism taught that, like Plato taught, that universals are divine. They're identical to divinity. Maximus calls the universals creatures and says that they can perish. But I also wanted to point out, not just in the secondary source, but if you read John of Damascus in the Fount of Knowledge, on page, if you have this volume, it's pages 100 to 101. If you just look for the paragraph in Fount of Knowledge, it's chapter 65, where he says what a universal is. So let's see, what does John of Damascus say universal is? Does he say there's no universals, like Romanides says? No, he doesn't say that. This is of itself, which does not belong accidentally. He's defining what is substance and what is accident. He says he defines substance. Then he says accident is that which may exist in something, may or may not exist in something, like sickness or health. The term to make is used in connection with the creative arts, and the thing done endures, as in the case of carpentry and the like. Thus, the process of making the couch remains. On the other hand, to do is used in cases. That's not the part where he talks about universal. Where's universal? Oh, here it is. I found it. I was reading the wrong part. So he's talking about what in philosophy, what does it mean when we say something is common? And he goes on to say that there's different senses of the word common. And then he says, having a common name is to be understood in respect to equivocal and univocal terms. That is of itself, which does not belong accidentally to something, but primarily to something, is essential, in essence, as the rational to a man. So rationality is essential to man. It's a natural, essential property. That which is universal signifies many individual things, as does the term man or mankind, animal or substance. That means universals are real. Okay, they're not non-existent. He's not an alchemist, as Father Romanides says he is. He being Father Romanides. So again, there is literally no way that anybody could read Athanasius, the Cappadocians, St. Cyril, St. Maximus, any kind of Christology from Pope St. Leo and Chalcedon, John of Damascus, and the fathers of the Icon Council, particularly St. Theodore the Studite, who utilizes the existence of universals to teach the fact that Christ assumed universal human nature in this book. Okay, so you're going to tell me that all of the fathers were wrong in being duped by Plato to think that universals existed, and nobody got it right until Father Romanides, centuries later, discovered that the real Orthodox teaching is that there are no universals, because that would vindicate the doctrine of analogia. So the quest to mow over any notion of analogia led him so far to say that there's no universals, the Logi aren't even in the divine mind. And that's what his lunatic disciple, John the Pilgrim, says. Now, for those that don't know about this topic, if you want an introduction to it, as I said, you can start with the divine names, but Ambiguum 7 clearly calls the Logi archetypes. It clearly identifies them as in the divine mind. And why these lunatics don't know this, which is, again, if you were to start studying the Logi, the first place you would start would be here, and it would be Ambiguum 7. Now, the advanced stage beyond that is getting into the ambigua, into the very difficult and technical ambigua 10, 41, and others. And I will tell you right now, you don't understand that without a very advanced understanding of philosophy. It's some of the most dense and technical in all of the patristic works ever, including Nissa's Against Eunomius. Some of the top theologians and philosophers in the Orthodox Church are still working through and trying to understand some of those texts. And I know you don't understand them. I know you have not even touched these, because I can tell by the way that you speak and your unfamiliarity with common terms like divine mind that you haven't even begun to touch these topics. And you've spent years coming after me and subverting what I do. Now, just to add fuel to this dumb fire, the Athanasium, question 2 in Athanasium is about universals and particulars and the one and the many. It's about the assimilation of universals to particulars and recapitulation. So had you even read 2 chapters into this, 2 questions into this, you would know that. And if you understood this great master that you claim to be the disciple of, your idol, and his denial of universals, you would know that that's not what is in the first 5 pages of this book. So all you've done is expose that you have no idea what you're talking about. And you have a mental obsession, a delusion of coming after me. I want to see if there's any other references to universals here. So there are discussions of the Logi and the energies towards the end. I can't read that. Restoration. So the Logi in relation to recapitulation, I think. Yeah. So if you want more on this, it is question 63 of the Ambigua, which deals with Logi and recapitulation. Again, completely demolishing this dumb position that there's no analogia and there's no Logi in the divine mind, and that we need to affirm William of Ockham's position. I mean, he agrees with Ockham's nominalism. He says he agrees with it. I mean, please tell me how you can reconcile the first 700 years of Christianity utilizing the notion of universals to have a universal human nature with Ockhamism. I mean, this is unbelievable. So we saw that in letter 234 of Basil, it's very clear that the essence is not known. We do not name the essence, but the energies we do name. Our naming of God is gathered from the attributes or the energies. This is the Greek word that's used there as operations, that he is listed, enumerated. Do you see that word there? It means named. The energies I named, but, oh wait, there is no naming of the energies, right? We don't do that. So let's look at a couple other important points in Romanides' system of thought. That's going to keep in mind that what we've seen before, by the way. So what we've seen before is this nominalism and this empiricism, which is supposed to get rid of the idolatry of the sickness of religion, which he identifies with analogical predication. Now, he's right to critique the Thomistic and Augustinian analogy of being, but he's wrong to extend that critique to the naming of energies too. That's false. That's wrong. So let's look at the keys in my article from many years ago pointing this out, and where I warned where this would lead people. The very core of the biblical tradition is that religion is a specific sickness with a cure. Religion is a sickness. The meaning of the Bible is not religion is a sickness. I don't know where this is psychobabble he came up with. This is what the meaning of the claim in the Bible, there is no God except Yahweh, means. What? Where does he get the idea that the meaning of the words, there is no God except Yahweh, means that religion is a sickness? I mean, it's psychobabble. He uses psychobabble. I mean, in the cure to sickness, he says that it's the circulatory, it's the fluids not going to the brain. What? We call religion a neurobiological sickness since it stems from a short-circuiting between the nervous system in the heart, which circulates the spinal fluid, and the blood system centered in the heart, which pumps the blood through the body. The cure of sickness of religion is accomplished by repairing the short circuit. What? This is a psychobiological psychobabble that is not what the Bible's talking about. Now, I'm willing to be corrected if there's a person who has seen where St. Gregory of Palamas says that that's the real meaning of theosis. That's the real meaning. And where he says that this is the Hasidic. What? The clearest New Testament outline of the cure of sickness of religion is Paul. 1 Corinthians 12 to 15, 11. Here we have the key to the epistles, which become clearer within this context. St. Paul was a Pharisee who stemmed from the tradition of the Hasidics, whereas Christ and his apostles belong to a parallel tradition. This sickness of religion is the short-circuiting of the spinal fluid. That's not what the Bible... Where did he get it? I have no idea. And again, maybe there's somebody who can tell me where I'm wrong. I don't have a problem saying I'm wrong, and this is some church father taught this, but I've never heard this, ever. That doesn't mean that it's wrong, but it sounds kooky to me. And this guy has a lot of quack statements. Now remember, he's so beyond us that nobody even understands him, and if you ever talk about him, you're an evil person, even though there's all this quack stuff here, which we're not supposed to talk about. But what? I mean, that... I'm sorry, that just sounds crazy to me. That sounds like psychobabble. It sounds like, I don't know what that is. Father Moody told me many years ago that he thinks that Fr Romanides got this from, what did he say? Studying Hindu thought. That Hindu chakra crap. What? Hindu chakra crap teaches us the short circuiting of the spinal fluid. And so he's literally saying that the delusions that humans have in their religion when they believe analogia entis, or analogia in any sense, is a result of spinal fluid being out of whack from their heart pumping it. It's just, this is quack, dude. This is quack stuff. And these people are willing to stake their lives and their insanity. This is... To spend years coming after me over this, do you see why I'm saying this is a mental illness? You're mentally ill, dude. You need help. Don't go away from me. Don't talk to me, John the Pilgrim. You're nuts. This is a mentally insane person. What in the world is this? This is crazy stuff. So notice the denial of any analogia. I mean, Maximus says the Bible points us to the Logi. The words in the Bible are pointing us to the Logi of the Bible. This guy says the opposite. The words in the Bible don't tell us anything about God because there is no analogy between the created and uncreated. So again, he keeps flipping the distinction between the uncreated and the created essence. Like, we don't talk about the essence, but he keeps flipping that and saying that, but we also can't name the energies. Okay, so do you understand this undoes your whole theology? And we're going to see in a minute where he says that towards the end, the Orthodox will not be members of any official church. Okay, so Father Heres, who stakes his huge amounts of support on Father Romanides, and his whole thing is, don't ever talk about the experience of God outside the church, right? Which I agree with him, that there's not theosis outside. The very guy that he's staking all this on, Romanides, says that theosis will occur outside of the official church. Okay, whatever. Okay, but I'm bad. Okay, I'm the bad guy, and I'm an evil, bad person, and I've always just been so evil, right? Yeah, I know. I'm the troublesome, quarrelsome person, sure. It's not your lunatic editor. It's me, sure. You want me to accept the guy who says there needs to be more Marxists in Greece? This is more problematic statements from Father Romanides. And can you imagine the amazing level of lies of these people, particularly John the Pilgrim? Look at this. By the way, I wonder why I had a hard time. I had to go on a Wayback Machine. Maybe they took this down because it's so embarrassing. This is from the Romanides site. Okay, this is from the Romanides site. Let's look at what he says about the metaphysical conception of religion. Orthodoxy, first and foremost, is concerned with this life. The fathers stress that there is no repentance after death. Many modern Greek theologians, however, following their teacher Adamantios Korais, have a metaphysical understanding of the subject and have copied the methodology of the Roman Catholics and the Protestants in the matter of religion. At the time when these people left to study theology in Europe and Russia, and also in America after the war, the great conflict had already begun years before between the empiricists, on the one hand, who are the heirs of the Enlightenment, and the French Revolution in 1789, and the metaphysicians on the other hand. The basic difference between the empiricists and the metaphysicians is that the essence of the empirical approach is observation, while that of the metaphysics is philosophical speculation. That's not exactly true. I mean, do you understand that this is bizarre? I mean, does he not think that how many church fathers did metaphysics? And so he seems to have adopted an Enlightenment philosophy that metaphysics, which resulted in the West from what he thinks is Augustinianism, is a bad project. Hence, his acceptance of nominalism from Occam. Keep that in mind, because Occam's nominalism leads to David Hume's empiricism. Occam is just the Humean before Hume. And this is why there is a Marxist atheist tendency in the psychobabble of Father John Romanides. I'm not joking, because if you are consistent by saying that dogma is analogia and is the sickness of religion, it then follows that following a book, the Bible, and dogmas is the sickness of religion. Now, I'm not saying that he went that far. Maybe he's just inconsistent. But this is a very bizarre, troubling interview. What Orthodox person in their right mind could say, I wish there were more Marxists in Greece? What? So the guy who has the uncreated light like no one else in the 20th century, that they all tell you have to follow and defer to, is so quacky that he says that we need more Marxists in the greatest enemy to the Orthodox Church in the 20th century. This guy says there needs to be more committed Marxists in Greece. And this quack lunatic has been after me for years, saying that I made this up. I didn't make this up. You are a liar. You lied in your schizo article, and I'm going to show you where he lies, by the way. We'll look at his schizo. It's too insane to read the whole incoherent babble. But I'm going to show you at the top where he says, everything I've claimed about Father Romanides is a lie. Everything I claimed is a lie. Guess what this dum-dum does at the bottom of his article? He admits that 2 of my points are correct. So this dummy can't even write an article in the midst of all his schizo boomer posting between all caps and changing colors like a lunatic. He can't even remember what he wrote at the beginning of the article, where he says that every point I'm wrong about. Oh, but then he's right about 2 points. I mean, that's how dumb this guy is. The basic difference, and we'll move on to Romanides. At that time, all religious people were followers of metaphysics. So he's at war with metaphysics. He thinks that this is a thing invented by Platonists, and so he's clearly an empiricist, right? I mean, he's saying there's no universals. I accept Occam, and I'm an empiricist in terms of empirical dogmatics. That's not the same thing as existential experience of God. So again, I don't even know if he knows what he's talking about. And it's not my words. And don't tell me this is mistranslated, because it's from the Romanides site. And by the way, James Kelly, who was the first lunatic, was best friends with this IRA Marxist for many years. So this makes me wonder if these people aren't subverters. I mean, why are you telling me that I need to be into this guy who will cure me from the sickness of religion, who says that religion is a delusion of spinal fluids? And you were best friends for years with a famous, prominent IRA Marxist, according to your own testimony. I think you're the subverter, James Kelly. I think you're the subverter, John the Pilgrim. I think you're a liar. And your schizo post shows that. Nowadays in Greece, all Marxists are empiricists without being aware of it, of course. This is because Greek Marxist ideologists do not know what the family tree of Marxism is, as do their counterparts in Europe and America. For here, they have merely learned their lessons mechanically by rote, like the Jehovah's Witnesses. I believe that it is a great tragedy, not an Aeschylus one, but a shameful one, that there are no powerful intellectual Marxists in Greece. I believe it is a great tragedy that there are no powerful intellectual Marxists in Greece. Of course, this is fortunate for the police and right-wingers. By the way, he was a lifetime member of the Democratic Party. Pretty sure the Democratic Party was pro-abortion too. How do you reconcile that? Why does nobody talk about his lifetime membership in the Democratic Party, by the way? I don't care what your political party is. I don't believe in parties, but my point is that I'm pretty sure they stood for things that are not acceptable. Oh, but if you accept Marxism, maybe it is. Now, keep in mind, when I talked about this years ago, where he says this, these people all said, I'm twisting his words and lying about what he said. Can you tell me what he says, audience? Am I twisting his words about Marxism? What does he say? It is a great tragedy, a shameful one, that there are no powerful Marxist intellectuals in Greece. They already did their destruction. What are you talking about? Of course, this is fortunate for the right-wingers as well as for the modern Greek theologians. But it is unfortunate for the search for truth. So the person who's supposed to be the par excellence interpreter of orthodoxy in the 20th century that you must defer to is so deluded as to tell you that the search for truth should include public intellectual Marxists. The foundation of Marxism and the foundations of patristic theology from a scientific viewpoint are the same. What? Now remember, I made this up. Has anybody else talked about this? No, but see, I made this up. And then he goes into talking about how metaphysics is bad and evil and papist. That's embarrassing, man. Now here is quackademic John the Pilgrim in his schizo, insane, multicolored red, white, and blue attack, which, remember, he said, I'm not attacking Dyer. But this is clearly his blog. Nobody else has a dumbass blog like this. Coming after me on Romanides. I mean, this was right after he got booted from the Discord, because we realized he was a lunatic, a quack. And immediately he writes this stupid article. Now look at what he says. Dyer is demonstrably, verifiably... who even talks like this? He is demonstrably and verifiably wrong in his slander and vilifying of this holy... I mean, dude, get over yourself, man. Demonstrably, verifiably wrong in his slander, vilifying... Look, you're not writing in the 1700s, okay? And then he does the schizo all caps, showing anybody who does all caps and all is mentally ill right away. So I am wrong on every single point. So remember, and we're not even there's no point even going through this lunatic's post. He's a complete quack. But I want you to notice right here that I'm wrong about every point. Now let's go down to the very bottom of this dumb article. He admits I'm right about 2 points. I mean, what? That's all. Look at this. This person is insane. This is an insane person. And he thinks that because he knows Greek, which shows that it's him, that it's John Pilgrim, that gives him a special insight into understanding the philosophical concepts. Now, there's nothing wrong with knowing Greek. It's a great tool. It's a great aid. But if you don't have a philosophical understanding and you try to go to these topics and think that just because you know a language, it's going to give you one up, sorry, that it doesn't work like that. It doesn't work like that. And I'm going to show you right here. Did Father John hold some errors? Yes, he believed in evolution, which is serious. Now, wait a minute. I thought I was wrong on every single point. And then he goes on to say, and he admits to a utopian vision. Oh, you mean the Marxist stuff that I talked about? Pretty sure that utopianism and orthodoxy are not compatible. But that alone tells you that this person is mentally insane, because he said that I was wrong about every point. And then at the very bottom of the article says 2 points I was right about. So this is not a sane person. I mean, look, and by the way, the whole thing is filled with how I'm a cult leader and I'm mentally ill. And look at this. By the way, nobody read your blog, dummy. You don't have any comments. It didn't do anything except that I found it, and now I know that you did it and that you lied, saying that you weren't coming after me. I didn't come after him. I didn't do that. So here's the quackademic that he's defending, talking about aliens. Father Fr Romanides, all the planets are the same. Vindicating and affirming alien baloney. So here's this quack who believes in aliens, thinks that the problem of men is the spiritual sickness of religion, which is caused by spinal fluids. Which he says right here. Says that we need more Marxists. And these people call me liars for talking about what he says clear as day. And when you talk about all this, they say, we should overlook all this. Okay, and I overlooked all this for years. And did you overlook it? No, you this lunatic. Let's get to this loon. John the Pilgrim. Where did this lead him? So the beginning of this stupid kerfluffle today was over somebody posting a picture from my book, which was about Plato. It wasn't about Maximus. It wasn't about Nous. It wasn't about Logi in the Orthodox sense. The chapter is on Plato's Phaedo. And he doesn't even seem to know that there's a difference between Plato's usage of nous and the Orthodox usage of nous. So the first guy, who is Nectarios on Twitter, who's another of these lunatics who constantly just comes after me for no reason, says, where do the church fathers use the divine mind? What? And then I said, how can you be ignorant of a term that is Christology 101? And no, so where would we get this? Well, anybody who knows about Chalcedon knows that Christ has two natures, two wills, two minds. Divine mind and a human mind. Two minds, divine mind and human mind. Now, notice his first response. I'm happy to see the quotes from the fathers that say Christ has a divine mind, as if he doesn't. Or two minds, a divine and a human. This is Christology 101. I don't have to prove to you something that you, supposedly as a PhD, worshiper of Romanides, should know. And your boss should tell you that that's 101. Then he says, where does Christ possess a divine nous? My chapter wasn't about Christ. I didn't say anything about Christ having a divine nous. And he doesn't seem to know the difference between mind and nous. They're different things in different systems. And with every heretic, they can't distinguish words in different systems and contexts. They do the exact same thing always. Basil said every heretic confuses through a word concept fallacy words in different senses. So he can't understand that, number one, nous in Plato is not the same thing as nous, heart, in the patristic Orthodox sense. Two different things. Okay? There's a little overlap because sometimes nous does mean mind. But he is literally saying the Apollinarian view, where does Christ have a divine mind? Now, it's Apollinarian because to reduce any faculty or trait of nature to person is a form of Apollinarianism. If you don't know, Apollinaris said Christ doesn't possess a rational mind or soul. That is replaced by the person of the Logos. So he replaced a natural faculty or trait and reduced it with a hypostatic picking out of the person of the Logos. So this is a version of Apollinarianism where the mind, according to him, watch what he says. This is unbelievable. He believes that the mind of Christ is the person of the Father. And you wait till you see why he comes to this conclusion. So in the DMs, and I don't have any, this lunatic's been after me for years, so you bet I'm going to share the DMs. I don't think there exists a divine mind in the way that I see it put out there. In the liturgy of the church, the mind of God is the person of the Father. He thinks that's Trinitarian 101, right? We're going to see this in a minute. He says it's literally in the prayers of the church. Now, the prayers that he will refer to, which I have pulled up in a second, are liturgical prayers that are using the analogy of Father to mind and Logos to Word. That's an analogy which, by the way, shows that his obsession, Fr Romanides, is wrong because that's an analogy. You couldn't do that if there were no analogies. But secondly, it's an analogy. We don't use the analogy to tell us that the person of the Father is equivalent to the divine mind. That is so dumb. Because everybody who knows anything about Trinitarian theology knows that anything that is an essential or natural property is common to all three. Mind is a common property just like will or nature, because mind is a faculty of nature. It is common to all three. And it is embarrassing that you have this person up here teaching this and coming after me for years. And this is what this person, and he believes this because of the Romanides doctrine. How can you say there's a divine mind? Because there's no analogia. You can't say a divine mind. So what must it be in this dum-dum's philosophy? It must be the person of the Father. Otherwise, analogia. So his dumb analogia denial led him to a heresy, to Apollinarianism. How about Christology, moron? Where? Give me a reference. There isn't one. So I asked him, is one of Christ's minds, if Christ has two minds, human and divine, is one of them the Father? He says, that is my point. Good job. You just affirmed a ridiculous heresy. And here he is in his response. Dyer expose. I have a simple question. And he doesn't even understand that these liturgical texts are making the analogy, dude. In a figure the theologians fittingly called the mind, word, and spirit, thus signifying passionless begetting of the Son from the unbegotten Father. This is the analogy that constantly is used. It can go all the way back to Justin Martyr and Tertullian, who make this analogy to mind that is necessary as the presupposition to produce word. So it's an analogy. It doesn't reduce a natural faculty or property to the person of the Father, dummy. The unoriginated mind ineffably got the word. It's an analogy, which shows that Fr Romanides is wrong in denying all analogies. This does not mean that there is not a common mind that the Trinity shares, and which forms one of the properties of the divine nature in the hypostatic union. So you just totally embarrassed yourself in not knowing something that is fundamental Christology 101. And you came after me for years, and I told you that I would embarrass you if you didn't stop, and you didn't stop. You were asked to stop this week, and you didn't stop. And why is this person, the editor, making such a fundamentally stupid mistake, coming after me for years? And he's the editor at Uncut Mountain. And why does he have sock profiles? And don't believe that he's a harmless, humble man. No, he's not. He's a lunatic liar. Imagine trying to believe in Christology with no universals. The first thing I'm going to tell you is go read the famous essay by Professor Romanides, excellent essay, Christ the Universal Person. And that will show you just on a simple level how silly it is to think that there are no universals, but I'm going to have a correct Christology. I would also say, if you want to understand the microcosm, macrocosm position of St. Maximus, which also refutes this dumb idea, go read this article as well. Those are good introductions. Then read Ambiguum 7 of St. Maximus. And then to get a little deeper, I recommend the next paper to read is Father Florovsky's excellent paper, Creation and Creaturehood, which is one of the best treatments on the Logi. It also will go into great detail explaining that the divine mind is where the Logi are, and that they are energies. They are not in the divine essence. The Logi are energetic. Dr. Bradshaw is clearly, this is not even up for debate. But these people are mentally ill. So, there you go. Was there anything else I wanted to get to? By the way, if you don't believe me, go read, here's Romanides saying we need more Marxists. Here's Romanides saying he believes in aliens, and we need to prepare like the Vatican for the announcement of alien life. I mean, this is a quack, man. Here's your spinal fluids. Religion, the sickness of religion is a spinal fluid problem. And then here, if you want my fuller essay where I go into this, critiquing Romanides from 6 years ago, here you go. So notice that these individuals have critiqued me, rebuked me, come after me for years. This is what they're standing, this is the hill they want to die on and what they're standing up for. This stuff, this quackery. And anytime you go against this, they pull the one up of how dare you, and you should never critique this person, and you don't have the divine light, and he did. You mean the divine light of the spinal fluid that's out of whack, or the divine light of atheist academics who tell us how to really interpret the Bible? Or is William of Ockham having the divine light? Oh, I forgot the text where he says that the religion, people at the end of the world will not be in there will be no official Orthodox church, but in fact, people will be saved literally the night and day opposite of everything that Father Harris preaches every day. Let me find that, because that's a weird one, bizarre quote. Let's see, I got it over here. And people who want to come at me and rebuke me, I don't care, because I probably won't be talking about doing public theological teaching anymore. So I don't care. You rebuke whoever you want. Let's see. We will know that the last one to be glorified has passed away when the human society has passed away. This one that will be glorified probably will not be a member of any official church. So how does that match with Father Peter Hears' message of you can't be glorified outside the Orthodox Church? Father Romanides says the short circuit question of his spinal fluids. We will know that the last one to be glorified has passed away when human society has passed away, and the last one glorified will probably not be a member of any official church. Pretty sure the Orthodox Church is an official church, and it's the church, right? So glorification, according to him, occurs outside of the Orthodox Church. Where's Father Here's condemning this ecumenism? Where's Father Here's calling him out? They will go after me. They've been going after me for years. Not Father Here's, but his lunatic editor man. And this is what the person says that they're championing. Father Peter Here's whole message is that the presuppositions of orthodoxy are that there's no glorification outside the Orthodox Church. Their champion says that at the end of the world, the true glorified people won't even be in any church. And what did John Pilgrim say? I lied and made all this up. No, you are a liar. You lied. I didn't make any of this up. And again, you rebuke me all you want. I don't care. I probably won't be talking about theology anymore. So, whatever. I mean, this is just... So the lunatics now can go back to the asylum, and the lunatics can go... The clergy can deal with the lunatics, because they're the ones that should be dealing with the lunatics. Okay? I don't know how to deal with the lunatics. Okay? I don't work in the asylum. I don't know the proper procedures. The lunatics have been at me for years, and especially in the last 3 weeks, out of the woodwork. So, okay, I'm not going to deal with the lunatics. I'm done dealing with lunatics. Period. I'm out of it. Not leaving the church, but I don't think that it doesn't make sense for me to do this. Like, not to talk about content. I think it makes sense for me to talk about philosophy, movies, geopolitics, whatever else we talk about. But it just doesn't make sense to talk about... It's not right for me to teach and talk about theology, because for one, I don't think I have the temperament for it. A lot of people have said that you don't have the temperament for this. And you know what? I kind of think they're right. And so I'm not changing any of my positions, but I am talking about what I think is appropriate. And when I see, the new converts and people that we help come to the church and that we help build up for years, just completely turn and backstab, and then people in their circles are LARPing as monks and telling everybody not to watch movies and not to listen to music. I mean, it's just so nauseating and ridiculous. And it's just so dumb. I mean, it's just childish. So I'm not going anywhere, but I'm not going to talk about publicly being I never had the desire to be a theologian or teacher. And I'm sure everybody's mad. I don't care. You push me to a certain point, I'm not going to put up with this stuff. And I'm not manipulable. And when I feel like people are trying to manipulate me is when I'm going to say, wait a minute, that's enough. Bays Pay Piggy, $50. Thank you for exposing these goofballs. Jay, God bless you and Jamie. Well, I think they should be. I mean, how many years is this from these people, especially John the Pilgrim? So thank you for that. Much appreciated. Asgard Audio, $10. When is there a J. Dyer Funko Pop? I want to get mine. I'm trying to find the right Funko Pop for the right setting. And maybe one day there will be one. We'll see. J. Benno, $5. Can you explain your disdain for NLP? Neuro-linguistic programming? I mean, isn't it like just manipulative sales techniques? So if you're talking about when I was saying in conversations that your NLP is not going to work on me, it's not necessarily a disdain for sales techniques. But when people in debates, for example, constantly repeat my name, that's actually one of the techniques of NLP. And so I'm halfway joking, because maybe in some of these cases people don't know what NLP is. But it's funny because it is an NLP technique to, in a debate, constantly repeat somebody's name. Panos, $2. Father Ludovicos in his book Ecclesiology says Romanides is actually Augustinian in his attitude and outlook, which was my suspicion as well, reading his writings. I've read several critiques of Father Ludovicos, but I've not read that one, so I'm not sure how that would be, but I'd be interested to hear that. Panos again, $2. To continue, there seems to be a lot of weird things happening in recent Greek theologians. I don't know about that. Don't keep up with it. Christos Yanaros admits that he is very influenced by Western philosophy. I read he's like into Origenism and Universalism, so I don't know. But thank you. NV, $10. Thank you for all the content, Jay. God bless. Thank you. And again, I'm gonna keep talking about the philosophy, but it just doesn't feel right to be dealing with this. And so, don't come to me with as if I am your spiritual teacher. I'm not your guru. I am not your spiritual father. I'm not any of those things. Desert Vagabond. Jay, I ran across someone who's very competent in Immanuel Kant, Hume, and these philosophies. Do you happen to have any talks on Kant? There's a couple on Kant, but not on specifically the books. I did go into an introduction to Prolegomena to Any Future Metaphysics, but I didn't like do an in-depth talk on Critique of Pure Reason, right? So we haven't done because it's really difficult. But maybe eventually I'll do that, because I do plan to be in the near future doing more talks on literature, on history, philosophy, on the topics that I feel comfortable talking about. I'm just not, there's so many of these mentally ill people that when you talk about Orthodox theology, they come out of the woodwork and just go nuts. And I'm not dealing with these people anymore. There's something wrong with these people. So I'm not dealing with it. So I will be talking about those things more. J Mel, $40. Jay, someone just sued Mars Candy Bars, claiming that Skittles are toxic in terms of human consumption. Wow. Interesting. I wonder why people haven't tried that in the past. I mean, these foods are, they're not foods. I mean, they're just pure chemicals. So interesting. Crispy Johnson, $10. Can you please give a shout out to Kristen Slowboy at your event in Nashville in your best Irish Lucky Charms accent? Irish Lucky Charms. I'd like to give a shout out to Kristen Slowboy at Nashville. Is that what you meant? Or did you mean at the Nashville event? I'm confused. Real Cooter Brown, $8. Good job tonight. These goobers are outed. You are doing important work. Thank you. But I think when it comes to these theological things, how many times do we have to refute Roman Catholicism? I think we pretty much did kind of the definitive trad refutation in the Trent streams. So, what really, how many times do we have to argue against the trads? How many arguments, how many streams can you do on these topics over and over and over? Goku, $5. Lend me your essence energy from the Spirit Bomb. You got me on that one. I don't know what that means. Evan S, $2. Jay, I recommend the movie Possessor. I watched that. I didn't care for it. That was a little too weird. It did have some, it's like the girl who goes in other people's minds to do mind control assassins. Yeah, it was a little weird for me. Not because of that, but because it was just kind of gruesome. It was gross. Wasn't a big fan. Blair, $5. You saved me from soy boy atheism. Hey, that's great to hear. Much appreciated. Bedford, by the way, how many times do we have to do the same debate too, right? What's the point of the same atheist debate, the same Muslim debate? They're all the same. So why do we have to have the same debate over and over? When somebody has a new argument, maybe. But Bedford, $3. Is there any evidence, archaeological, for iconography in pre-Hellenic Hebrew Judaism? I don't know. I know about the Duro Europa synagogue, but that's not pre-Hellenic, so I don't know. Genghis Khan, $10. Mr. Frodo. Keegan, $1. Can you do Protestant sola scriptura voice? Hits close to home? Oh, I finally found orthodoxy. Glad to hear it. Thank you. Robert Taylor, $20. I don't think that's the same Robert Taylor. Jay, I've been a supporter and a fan for many years. Maybe it is. I just wanted to ask for your prayers I'm headed to St. Vladimir's. And my wife is an OCA seminarian. Oh, well, I hope it goes well. Yeah, I wish you the best. I hope it goes well. Much appreciated. Orthodox Imperium, $50. I have no idea who John the Pilgrim is, but after the night stream, all I have to say is rest in peace, John the Pilgrim. Chase Haggard, will you be my dad's spiritual father or guru? Yes. I will only be the spiritual father guru to your dad, period. That's it. There's only one person ever that I've considered worthy, and that's your dad, Chase. That's it. So, and by the way, tell your sister Tristana, I'm sorry, because I'm sure Tristana wanted to be your dad's guru, but it ain't happening. Well, Emmanuel, $5. Spinal fluid free super chat. Well, yeah, you just need to get the right psychobabble and understand. By the way, there was another thing that Fr Romanides wrote that I couldn't find, which somebody hit me to many years ago. Maybe somebody can go find this because there's a lot of spurs that can do this stuff. But he has this other thing where he thinks that there's gadgets, scientific gadgets that you can go and put above the relics of the saints that will prove that there's a swirling vortex over the relics of the saints. I'm not joking. Whatever, dude. That's quack. Terry, $5. Jay, the whole reason that I even started to look at Orthodoxy was your lectures. Thank you for not lecturing with a lisp or limp wrists. Tropes, $5. I really enjoyed the theology talks as a curious non-denominational slow boy. You opened my mind to a lot. Well, you know what? There's nowadays there's no shortage of people putting out Orthodox content that are priests, and you can go to them. You have opened my mind a lot, and you've always been clear about not being a spiritual father. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. I am bummed about these topics, that these topics are on the way out. Well, you know what? Maybe down the road, it'll be more appropriate for me to do that kind of a thing. But, you know, I would just say if these questions are already kind of out there in people like Father Trenum, in other people doing work like this, so you can go to them. But yeah, anyway. All right. So thank you guys. Sorry we had to have such a weird stream, but you know, again, if you push me to a certain point, and you keep this up for years, I'm going to just show you that I don't put up with it. And it's embarrassing for this person to be an editor, in that kind of a position at one of the best traditional Orthodox sites out there. Orthodox ethos is great. Father Hears is great. I don't understand why this person lied to Father Hears by saying he was not going to do this, and yet he keeps at it. So I hope that, you know, he's dealt with in an adequate way, because this is years of this. And I'm 99% sure that he's the one that wrote the schizo blog post coming after me. This guy spent years in a server of a bunch of other Skittle subversives working to undo what we did. And he's the editor over there. So I don't understand that. So anyway, everybody have a good night, and I wish you well.